of the silt-rich river bottom. He hops off the end of the dock, landing in the marshy weeds. His Wellingtons sink about half a foot into the silt. The cold travels up his legs, makes him shiver. He grips the machete and slogs into the deeper water. Something stirs around him. He can see objects moving now under the surface of the river, like the bulbous backs of tortoises rising up through the haze. He splashes the edge of the machete on the surface of the water, which is now up to his waist. "Bringing in the sheaves! Bringing in the sheaves!" he croons in his basso profundo singing voice, a cross between an off-key Caruso and a sleepy Elvis. The hymn is from the 126th Psalm. "We shall come rejoicing, bringing in the sheaves." 25 feet away, the first slimy cranium rises out of the water with the lazy menace of a crocodile surfacing. The thing was once a woman, her age unknown, her long hair dangling in spidery strands like Spanish moss hanging off the smooth, stony surface of a boulder. Her eyes are craters of maggoty white pulp. Her flesh is bloated and puffy as an undercooked soufflé. "Sister!" The preacher raises his hands in a welcoming gesture. "Praise the Lord, you're right on time." The thing in the water grinds its slimy teeth as other skulls surface around her, stirred by the sound of the preacher singing, his voice calling his children home. There are dozens of them, both genders, in all imaginable states of decay, their monstrous faces fixed on the sound of Jeremiah's singing voice, their flesh as swollen as rotten seed pots about to burst. "We shall come rejoicing," the preacher croons, "bringing in the sheaves." The big man begins backing toward the riverbank. He sends a gentle wake through the bloody, rusty water as he beckons the walkers, a stringy mass of river moss clinging to his waist, trailing off into the currents. The fishy stench of the river mingles with the odor of mortified organs. The preacher claps his hands, as though applauding, luring the monsters toward the waiting truck. Jeremiah reaches the muddy bank and climbs out. He turns and bellows, "Earl, go ahead and open the rear door and lower the ramp." A squat, muscular, bald man in a denim jacket and sweatpants climbs out of the cab, hurries around to the rear of the trailer, and throws open the garage-style accordion door. Jeremiah reaches into his side pocket and pulls out a small novelty toy he found in the cache of trinkets in the Thorndike's camper. Made of hard-painted plastic, the little wind-up chattery teeth remind Jeremiah of his childhood a million years ago. He got one on Halloween once, and remembers now the sound it made when it hit the bottom of his candy bag. When he got home that night, he got a whooping from his dad for going out on Satan's night, but he kept the chattery teeth in his drawer. Now he winds the stem of the Thorndike's toy and thumbs the button. The chattery teeth begin clacking noisily, and a pair of tiny cartoon feet churn busily. By this point, the monsters have reached the river's bank and have started dragging themselves up the slope, their mossy, skeletal arms outstretched, their mouths drooling dirty spindrift. Earl stands aside and watches with queasy awe as Jeremiah tosses the little toy on board the empty cargo trailer. The little toy buzzes and chatters and whirs loudly inside the enclosure, a beacon, the noise magnified by the corrugated steel of the trailer walls. The walkers cock their heads toward the chatter as they stupidly lumber toward the trailer. When they get there, some of them manage, almost accidentally, to trundle up the walkway. Others fall off the sides. Jeremiah watches with the pride of a father watching toddlers take their first steps as several of the creatures vanish inside the trailer, drawn to the clacking noise. The preacher's skin tingles and itches. His eyes burn, but he barely notices it now. He is transported by the sight of the whole convoluted trap working so well. "That's enough for now," he finally calls out when he's got 5 of them. Earl hops up on the bumper rail and hooks the top of the door, pulling it down quickly and decisively. The dull metallic thud rings out, bringing a smile to Jeremiah's lips. We owe it all to young Thomas here, Lily Call announces to the other tunnel dwellers, after finishing her story of uncovering the treasures at Central Machinery Sales in Connorsville, Georgia. Tommy stands beside her, trying to stifle the awkward little grin on his face, his hands in the pockets of his faded Oshkosh dungarees. He nervously taps the heel of his hiking boot against the tunnel wall as he listens to Lily. He found this place on his own initiative. She gives him an appreciative glance. He deserves all the credit. The 5 other adults grin and nod, and Barbara Stern clucks her tongue approvingly at Tommy. Seated on makeshift chairs around the makeshift table in the makeshift lounge, the elders have remained silent throughout most of Lily's report. The air smells of coffee and black earth. The soft whir of above-ground generators vibrates the ceiling. At the other end of the tunnel, the children play quietly, reading books or fiddling with dolls. Barbara had asked Bethany Dupree to watch the little ones while the grown-ups have their talk, and now the 3rd grader hovers over the gaggle of tykes with the watchful eye of a mother hen. At last, Bob Stuckey winks at Tommy. The young man is a regular Christopher Columbus. Lily grins at Bob. And you thought he was loafing that day. She sits down at the table, and Bob pours her some fresh instant coffee. Lily takes a sip and says, My guess is there's at least 1,000 gallons of gas in that tank. David Stern speaks up. So what's the next step? I see the value of all this fuel, but how do you see the equipment entering into the equation? I mean, we're not exactly farming down here. Lily looks at Bob, and the glance they exchange is charged with emotion. Bob and I disagree over what our focus should be right now. Bob gives her a shrug. I think we're all focused on the same damn thing, Lily girl. Survival. Of course, Bob. Lily takes a deep breath. I guess we might as well throw it out there. Maybe take a vote. Gloria Pine looks around the table. Underneath the brim of her athletic visor, her expression furrows with confusion. The years have stolen some of Gloria's natural beauty, but beneath the deep lines, her blue eyes still glitter with vigor. Am I missing something? What are we voting on? Barbara Stern sighs and wipes a wisp of curly gray hair from her face. Let me take a wild guess. Lily wants to take Woodbury back, and Bob wants to stay put down here in the catacombs indefinitely. For a moment, Lily and Bob stare at each other, taken aback. Harold Staubach grins, his bony ebony features filling with mirth, his dark eyes twinkling. He has his Banlin golf shirt buttoned up tight against his neck waddle, ever dapper, stubbornly genteel. She's right, though, isn't she? David Stern clears his throat. I've lived it with it for almost 30 years. The woman is always right. David, shush. Scattered chuckles fade quickly under the weight of the subject. Finally, Gloria Pine looks at Lily. She is right, though, isn't she? Lily lets out a pained sigh. Look, I know it's basically an open secret that I want to take the town back. I see the pros and cons, believe me. It feels safe down here, I get that. But I don't think we've really thought through the long-term effects of living down here. Lily, we've been over this. Bob starts to object when he sees Barbara Stern raising a hand. Let the lady make her case, Bob. Thank you, Barbara. Lily takes a deep breath. Okay. First of all, you can't live under here indefinitely, no matter how good your ventilation is or how clean your water from those underground springs is. Your muscles are eventually going to atrophy. Plus, it might seem like we're impervious to walker attacks, and maybe we are. But what about survivor attacks? Those 2 Jennies up there are like red flags, like neon signs saying, attack us. Bob motions toward Harold. Lily, I already told you, Harold and I are working on blims for those generators. We also got an exercise area in the works, and there's miles of tunnels down here we haven't even charted yet. We got tons of room. The kids could play soccer in some of these passageways, and we're working on better ventilation every day. Plus, you get tunnel fever, you can always go up top. Lily looks at him. Bob, you have no idea what effect this is having on the kids. What are you talking about? They're fine. Fine? She looks at Barbara. Tell them how fine their skin is. Barbara Stern looks at Bob. Well, it's hard to tell if it's getting better or worse. I showed you the rash on Melissa's ankles, Bob, and Lucas has what looks like the beginnings of hives on his neck and back. And most of the kids are coughing and congested now, getting a lot more colds, it seems. I think it's the dampness, but you're the expert. Bob takes a deep breath. Okay, look. We'll go out again this afternoon. Hit that drugstore we passed up north on the last run we did. I'm thinking a little cortisone cream and Sudafed will do the trick. That's not the point, Bob. Lily fixes her gaze on the older man's deep-set eyes, which are buried in wrinkles and leathery skin. Bob's face is a road map of hard days and nights, hard drinking, hard living. But behind his gaze is hard-won wisdom. Lily can sense it. So can the others. It's not just skin rashes and sniffles. It's quality of life. It's having the options that we only have above ground. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Hold your horses for a second, Gloria pipes in again with passion glinting in her eyes. Quality of life nowadays, if you'll excuse my French, means not getting our asses eaten, period. It's like you said yourself, Lily. We're safe down here. And I'm sorry, but somebody should acknowledge something else. She looks at Bob. We're safe because of this man right here. Bob proffers a weary smile. I don't know about that, Glo. I just got lucky snooping around one day. She winks at him. What do you know? He's modest, too. She looks at the others. Seriously, though. She looks at Lily. I'm with Bob on this. We're getting the ventilation working better and better every day. It's cool in the summer down here, and it's warm in the winter. We can get to the food sources when we have to, and we're almost to the point where we can filter the spring water. Bob nods. All true. Plus, think about this. We got modes of travel now that don't involve picking our way through hordes of walkers. We can get to most points within a 10-mile radius without even setting foot up top. Lily lets out an exasperated sigh. She feels as though she's not articulating her side of the argument well enough, not getting through to them. She remembers high school debate class, and how she always got too emotional trying to rally people to her side. How her emotions always stole her eloquence, and she acknowledges to herself now how those same emotions have almost gotten her killed in recent months. Harold Staubach speaks up. I have to say, for what it's worth, I'm leaning toward Bob and Gloria on this one. He looks down as though embarrassed to make eye contact with Lily. I guess I just don't see the upside of going back up. Lily shakes her head. She pushes herself away from the table and begins to pace. You guys are not looking at the long term. No one responds to this. Bob looks down. The silence weighs on them like a funeral pall. Lily realizes the question she has posed, the imponderable question of whether there even is a long term, torments them in their private thoughts and nightmares. She wipes back a wisp of hair that has fallen across her face, chews on her lip, thinks it over. She can hear the nervous tapping of Tommy's boot heel on the wall behind her. She finally says, Okay, fine. Let's put it to a vote. All those in favor of staying put, staying down here in the tunnels for, let's say, the foreseeable future. She looks around the table. Raise your hands. Slowly, tentatively, Gloria raises her hand. Bob raises his. Harold Staubach throws a nervous glance at the Sterns, and then hesitantly raises his hand. 3 votes for staying in the tunnels. Okay. Cool. Lily looks around the group. All those in favor of working toward one day getting the town back, raise your hands. Barbara and David Stern, with zero hesitation, each shoot a hand up. Lily nods at them and raises hers. Who would have guessed? We got a tie on our hands. Hey! Barbara Stern points at Tommy Dupree, who stands against the tunnel wall. The young man has his hand raised high, his ruddy freckled face screwed up with indignation. Barbara grumbles, "What is he? Chopped liver?" 2 separate supply runs are launched that afternoon, one underground and one at ground level. The first, comprised of Bob Stuckey and Gloria Pine, disembarks shortly after noon. They follow a map that Bob had hand-copied from a 140-year-old plat survey, and they start out down the main conduit, squeezing through the east barricade and then turning south and proceeding down a side tunnel that up until now has been unexplored. Their target is the defunct mining company equipment that, according to county surveys, lies just beyond the river to the east. They believe all manner of supplies, including medicine, could very well still be stored there. Meanwhile, Lily and Tommy Dupree hike the 3 miles or so down the main tunnel to the Elkins Creek cave-in, dig their way through the drifts of dirt, and exit the underground near Pilson's Bridge, where scores of ruined walker bodies lie in disarray on the banks of the creek, like Civil War casualties bleaching away to powder in the unforgiving sun. The wind and the light and the odors of rotting flesh amid the carpet of pine and pecan shells are so overpowering that Lily and Tommy get dizzy as they creep through the shadows of the hardwood forest along the banks of the creek. They hike another mile or so until they come to Bob's secret fleet of vehicles parked under the canopy of great live oaks, camouflaged by nettings of foliage draped carefully over the SUVs and pickups. Bob and David Stern had risked their lives the previous week, amidst the building hordes, salvaging these vehicles from Woodbury and Carlinville. Now, Lily and Tommy quickly and silently commandeer one of the SUVs, pulling off the shroud of leaves, finding the keys in the visor where Bob had left them, kicking the engine to life, and carefully pulling across the threshold and onto the access road that winds along Elkins Creek. 15 minutes later, Lily pulls down an entrance ramp onto the wreckage-strewn lanes of Highway 19 and heads south. Her plan is to try and reach Tifton or even Valdosta before nightfall, farther than they've ever traveled on a supply run, in order to search for a new source of propane, batteries, light bulbs, and fuel that hasn't been picked over. She knows of a Home Depot down around Cordell. She makes note that the fuel gauge on the road-worn RAV4 is 3/4 full, and she explains to Tommy that they have to make sure that they don't get beyond the point of no return. Tommy has never heard this expression, and it sounds ominous to him. But Lily explains that it merely means they have to make sure they always have enough gas in the tank to get back home. It's slow going for quite a while. The graveyard of wrecked cars and trucks petrified now by the turning of the seasons into leafy heaps, their kudzu-covered carcasses glued to the pavement in emulsified, pasty puddles. Weaving in and out of the wreckage, Lily and Tommy idly talk about the future, hoping that there actually is a future. Tommy starts reminiscing about his late mother and father, both of whom perished in the tumult that took Woodbury down last month. He speaks of them as heroes, forgiving them for their zealotry. Lily is taken aback by the boy's maturity. Perhaps she's seeing a side effect of the plague. Maybe it weans a kid off childhood. Maybe it girds a person for the inevitable loss that will sooner or later touch every living human. The tragic events of the last few months seem to have made Tommy Dupree more comfortable in his skin, and this is thoroughly, endlessly fascinating to Lily. They drive and talk, and drive some more, and talk about the afterlife and God and the apocalypse and the possible causes of the plague and everything else under the sun that Tommy can think of. They pass at least a half a dozen gas stations that lie in ruins, the pumps overturned, the offices ransacked, the storage tanks as dry as coffins. They talk some more. They talk for so long, and the conversation is so interesting to Lily, that she does something she'd have thought she would never do in a million years. She forgets about the fuel gauge. Chapter 10. The battered RAV4 skids to a stop, kicking up a whirlwind of dust, the G-force slamming Tommy into the dash, his shoulder belt preventing him from breaking his nose. He jerks back in the seat, blinking compulsively. The silence crashes. Lily holds onto the steering wheel with a death grip, staring straight ahead, taking deep breaths. What? What happened? Tommy looks at her. What is it? I can't believe it. What? I can't believe what I just did. What? Tell me. What? The point of no... She starts to explain, but all at once she gets distracted by her surroundings. The thick woods on either side of the highway, the overturned bus and the culvert a few hundred yards up the road. Things are reacting all around them to the introduction of an alien car into the poisonous ecosystem. Trees are shivering in the deeper woods, noises drifting on the breeze, smells wafting. Lily can't believe what she's done. Tommy cranes his neck in order to see the gas gauge. The needle is a hair above E. Oh, shit. Shit! He glances out the windshield. In the gray middle distance, behind columns of diseased pines, shadows stir. In the opposite lane, something crawls out from under a wreck, a pasty white cadaver with half its face missing. 100 yards farther up the road, a pair of ragged reanimated corpses in blood-stained hospital smocks shuffle slowly out from behind a faded, torn billboard for the Florida Commission on Tourism, showing a bikini-clad siren on a sun-drenched beach and the words, "When you got it bad, we got it good." Lily pounds angrily on the steering wheel. Fuck! Okay, so we got a little bit of gas left, right? Don't we? Lily stops banging on the wheel and gazes down into her lap with equal parts despair, rage, shame, and terror. What was I thinking? How could I have been so fucking stupid? Stupid! But we got a little bit left, right? She wipes her mouth, tries to gather her thoughts. In her peripheral vision, she can detect shadowy figures shambling out of the woods, slowly but steadily moving toward them. The sky roils with the dark clouds, a storm threatening. The smell of black decay filters through the vents. Not enough to get back, Tommy. That's the main problem. We don't have enough to get back because we went way beyond but maybe we should turn around and head back anyway and see how far we get. Lily sees 3 walkers in her rear view, closing the distance. They hobble robotically toward the RAV4 with arms outstretched. 2 males and a female, each of them very old, both in age and state of decay, perhaps former residents of a nursing home, working their black teeth with the fervor of piranhas, chewing at the air with feral hunger. They make the flesh on the back of Lily's neck bristle. I'm not sure that's going to get us anywhere. We can't just sit here. Hold on. Lily opens the map case next to her, quickly fishing through the loose candy wrappers and garage door remotes. She grabs a lighter, a pocket knife, a flashlight, and a box of 22 caliber 36 grain bullets for the Ruger. Grab the backpacks. We're getting out? Just do it, Tommy. Don't ask any questions. Just do what I say. He twists around and grabs their rucksacks from the back seat, then hands Lily's over. She stuffs the items from the map case into it, checks the box of ammunition, pulls her Ruger pistol, checks the magazine. Look under your seat. Should be a crowbar under there. Grab it. The boy finds the crowbar. And open the glove box, Lily orders. Tommy flips the panel down. What am I looking for? Maps. Any maps you see in there, grab them. The boy does so as Lily glances back up at the rear view and sees the 3 dead senior citizens closing in on them. The creatures approach the SUV with heads cocked, mouths drooling black bile, eyes geeked open like silver reflectors. Lily yanks the shift lever down into reverse. Hold on, Tommy, she cries. She kicks the accelerator and the engine howls. The steel-belted radials spin wildly for a moment on the sandy pavement, then find purchase, and the SUV lurches backward. The walkers loom in the mirror for a single instant, their eyes getting big right before the impact. The SUV shudders as the muffled sounds of wet bones and cartilage crunching travels under them, making them momentarily lose traction on the grease of dead remains. The RAV4 fishtails furiously as it continues to back away from the grisly gore-soaked pavement. A moment later, Lily slams down the brake pedal and brings the careering SUV to a noisy halt. Hold on! She jerks it into drive and rockets forward. By this point, the pair of billboard lurkers have traversed out across the shoulder and lumbered onto the highway, and now are shuffling directly toward them, smack dab in the middle of their lane, oblivious to the 3,500 pounds of Japanese steel rushing toward them. The impact throws one of the creatures into the air with the force of a catapult and rips the other one in two, sending half its torso into the woods on a comet tail of glistening red entrails and the other half thumping under the chassis of the speeding SUV, grinding it into bone meal. Lily keeps the foot pedal pinned, the steering wheel steady. The RAV4 charges away from the scene. "What now? What now, Lily?" The boy twists in his seat, gazing out the rear window at the carnage receding into the distance. "Grab everything you brought with you. Pack, machete, water, the other pistol." The boy scrambles to gather up his things and secure them in the pack on his belt. The SUV rumbles over a series of potholes as Lily steers it toward suitable cover. "We'll ditch the car in a safe place, hide it somewhere, and try to find some gas." She follows the highway around a bend, past a deserted industrial park, and down a sloping hill into a valley of long-neglected farm fields, now completely overgrown and gone to seed, before she realizes that the RAV4 has burned the last drops of fuel in its tank. They roll into a rest area on fumes, and then have to get out and push the vehicle by hand around the back of one of the buildings. By the time they light out on foot, heading south, the afternoon has already started to give way to evening. "Easy does it, hotshot!" Norma Sutters braces herself against the car's passenger door as Miles Littleton careens down Georgia State Road 520 just west of Albany. He weaves the muscle car in and out of the slew of abandoned vehicles as though skiing down an Olympic slalom course, barely avoiding the corners, nearly sideswiping every other wreck. He drives with the practiced ease of a veteran wheelman, a street kid whose DNA has been recombined with axle grease and carbon monoxide. He wears a tricolored Bob Marley beret on his tight, dark curls, and his long-lashed eyes fix themselves on the white lines clocking under the car, as though they are a flash of a hypnotist's watch. His gold tooth glistens. He's in a hurry. "You said step on it," he mutters almost to himself. "I'm stepping on it." "I didn't say to get us killed." Norma gazes through the windshield for a moment, noticing a cluster of walkers up ahead milling about the gravel shoulder. They look like commuters waiting for a train that will never come. Miles steers the car straight for them. Norma closes her eyes. "Lordy, Junior, don't do this to me again!" She feels a thump, as though the car has just cobbled over a bump, and she opens her eyes. The outside of the passenger window is turned deep red in the backwash of blood tossed up by the impact. Particles of brain matter and hair and tissue run horizontally across the glass, blowing off the side of the car in the slipstream. Miles is giggling. Norma glances in the side mirror and sees the human remains receding into the distance behind them, the walkers sideswiped by the Challenger now reduced to gruesome body parts and headless torsos strewn across the shoulder. She throws him a look. "Can't we just concentrate on finding these people?" I say fuck these people. I say we just boogie on out of this part of the world. "Miles, we've been over this 1,000,000 times. I don't want no part of this crazy-ass shit," he grumbles. "Batshit fucking preachers waging holy wars and shit. Fuck it. That don't have nothing to do with me. You neither. What that motherfucker's planning with them toys and shit, it ain't just crazy, it's fucking evil. I say we find an island somewhere, roll some fatties, and stay high for the rest of our natural lives." "I thought you was a Christian." She aims her scornful gaze at her surrogate son. "We can't just turn a blind eye to this shit, Miles. How the fuck we gonna find these people in the first place?" "We'll find them. Don't you worry." She taps her finger on the crumpled road map in her lap. "Just stay on this road till we get to 29, then head south. They gotta be somewhere around that Woodbury place. They're in a motherfucking tunnel, girlfriend. They're below ground, remember? How the fuck you expect to find them in a motherfucking tunnel? You're the ones gonna get us killed. We'll find them. They gotta come up for air every once in a while. I ain't even sure I got enough gold juice to make it all the way down there. I thought you told me you had enough of them tanks in the trunk to make it to the coast and back 2 times over. You lying to me, boy? I didn't plan on taking that side trip up the Chattahoochee with that motherfucker." Norma lets out a weary sigh and wrings her plump little hands. She wears a ratty cardigan sweater over her church dress, and still she shivers in the cool of the day's waning hours. It's almost dusk. The edges of the sky have turned indigo blue, and the low clouds are moving in, scudding the horizon with brooding gray monoliths. "Lord have mercy. What a world," she murmurs. Miles shakes his head. "Suppose we do find these people. What the fuck you gonna tell them?" She looks down. "I'm gonna tell them everything. What are these folks as bug-fuck crazy as that preacher? Everything of that? What if these people are just as fucking evil as Garlets? Norma gazes back out the passenger side window, the passing landscape tinted red now by the blood-filmed glass. Then God help us all. Darkness closes in around Lily and Tommy as they creep silently down a farm road cutting between two scabrous tobacco fields. They move in a single-file line along a split-rail fence and communicate mostly with nods and gestures in order to avoid attracting the attention of lurkers. For the last hour, they've noticed an increasing number of dead in the area, a few of which they have taken down with their bladed weapons. One came from inside a culvert, lunging at them with alarming velocity. Lily managed to cleave its skull at the last moment with her rusty machete. Minutes later, another one surprised them as they passed a derelict grain elevator, the walker stumbling out of a musty storage room. The boy rose to that occasion by driving his crowbar through the thing's left ear. Lily now worries that they risk inadvertently stumbling across a swarm. She has her silencer on her Ruger, but she wants to avoid using up her limited supply of ammo. She would like to be indoors, or at least under cover, by nightfall. And by the looks of the sky, that's not too far off. The roar of crickets has already risen like a tide around them, and the air has that clammy, pithy chill that it gets in the open country at sunset. The worst part, though, is the scent of death on the wind. Lily can recognize the acrid, festering, sickly stench of a swarm a mile away. Only a mob of walkers can reek like that, and the odor is now sending a continuous wave of gooseflesh down Lily's back. They reach a lonely crossroads and pause. Lily is about to whisper something to the boy when the tobacco leaves to their immediate left begin to rustle and quake. Lily sees a massive figure moving toward them from behind the stalks, the breathy growling noise rising above the crickets. She pushes the boy aside and draws her Ruger. From the tobacco plants bursts an enormous male in greasy dungarees, reaching and growling with monstrous hunger etched on its cadaverous face, its shark-like eyes practically luminous in the twilight. It wears a strange little hat that looks almost comical on its huge, livid head, and it smells of maggot-infested meat and scorched shit. Lily fires a single blast, the noise like a gunshot fired through a wet blanket, still loud but dampened, directly into the creature's cranium. The back of its head erupts in pink plumes of matter as the thing instantly folds. For a moment, Lily and the boy just stand there, staring at the fallen walker. For some reason, its attire gets Lily's attention. She kneels and takes a closer look. The creature's hat has come askew in the fall, and Lily picks it up. The pinstriped material, the silver, grime-flecked brim, the shape of it, all of it looks familiar. But at first Lily can't identify it. She looks at the gore-streaked dungarees, the gray fabric pinstriped, an empty tool belt still attached to the thing's midsection. He was an engineer! Tommy Dupree points excitedly at the creature's boots. Lily looks at the boy. Yeah. Exactly, a train engineer. She stands up and looks to the north. Which means... I bet there's a station around here somewhere. Or maybe a switchyard or something. The boy stands up and excitedly looks toward the darkening horizon to the north. You know what? It does look like there's something up there on the other side of that farm. He points. See the water tower? I bet that's your train yard. Come on. He starts hustling northward, a spring in his step now. Who's stupid? Bob breaks the silence, his voice echoing slightly in the long, straight mine shaft. For almost an hour, he and Gloria have been trudging along the tributary tunnel, their bootsteps crunching in the fine ashy dust, looking for the mining company outpost, exchanging small talk, discussing their inevitable bid to return to Woodbury. Bob believes the miners may have very well left a wealth of resources down here when they closed up shop years earlier. Say what? Gloria walks along behind Bob with her lantern in one hand, the yellow pool of light shining down the endless channel of stone and the occasional dusty cobweb-filmed support beam. About 10 minutes ago, they'd come upon a caved-in area that had evidently been worn away over the years by sewage runoff, leaving behind a narrow channel through which they could both, with some effort, squeeze. On the other side of the cave-in was an ancient mine shaft that smelled of fuel oil and dry rot. "The hat," Bob says, shooting a thumb over his shoulder, indicating the visor Gloria is wearing, and always seems to be wearing, as though the thing is a good luck charm. "Says you're with Stupid, so I was just wondering if that was somebody in particular." She smiles to herself. "Yeah. Husband? Boyfriend?" "Nope. Nobody in particular, Bob. I guess you could say it's every man I ever dated." "Ouch. That bad?" "Ho, ho, ho. You don't want to know." "Sorry to hear that. Guess I ain't a very good judge of character when you get right down to it." "Well, hope your luck changes someday." "I appreciate that, Bob." She looks at the back of his head as they walk along single file in the narrow tunnel. "That's why it's good to meet somebody like yourself, with some semblance of an intellect." "Oh, I don't know about that." He chuckles. "I've been accused of a lot of things." "You remind me of my dad in a lot of ways." "No kidding." "Seriously, he was a self-taught intellectual, read all the time, drove an 18-wheeler most of his life, listened to books on tape." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Gloria keeps walking, but wipes her mouth at the thought of her old man. "He was kind, and he was kind of shy, but he knew a little bit about a lot of stuff." They walk in silence for a few moments until Bob says, "Your dad, is he passed before all this shit went down, thank God. I was an only child. My mom was in a nursing home in Savannah at the time of the outbreak. Her heart didn't hold out when it all went south. I buried her myself in a potter's field up to Hinesville." She swallows the unexpected wave of grief and sorrow as she walks. Not the happiest moment of my life, I'll be honest with you." "Sorry to hear that, Glo." She waves it off. "It's a miracle I made it to Woodbury. Told myself I was going to go out west, go to the mountains, be a hermit." She laughs. "Ha! Hitchhiking ain't the best mode of travel these days, I can tell you that." A beat of silence passes, boot steps crunching, the rattle of her lamp. "How did you end up there, Bob?" "I was traveling with—" He cocks his head, raises his Coleman, sees something in the darkness ahead of them. "Wait. Hold on." They come to a sudden halt. Bob gently puts a hand on Gloria's arm. She doesn't move. About 50 feet away from them, blocking their path, shimmering in the pool of light from the lantern, sits a small coal car. They cautiously approach. The little conveyance is about the size of a baby buggy, covered with mold and cobwebs, petrified, its wooden wheels almost fossilized with age. The closer they get, the more Gloria realizes the thing is covered in blood. Bob pauses next to it and takes a closer look. Gloria leans in, holding her lamp high. "Is that blood?" Bob wipes a fingertip across the surface of the carrier. "Sure is. Looks old." "How old do you think?" "Hard to tell. Not ancient old. Not decades. But maybe a year or two." He looks down. Gloria follows the pool of light as it sweeps across a pair of rails embedded like hardened arteries in the dirt floor of the tunnel. "We're definitely in the neighborhood of that mining office," Bob ventures. "According to the map, should be right above us." He follows the rails. "Stay close." Gloria does as he says, following along on his heels. Her hackles go up immediately. She feels that familiar tingling sensation at the base of her spine. She gets it every time something seems wrong, but she ignores it. She trusts Bob implicitly. Shuffling along behind him, close enough to touch the fringe of thick dark hair hanging over his collar, she realizes that she actually yearns to do just that. Touch his hair. Run her fingers through those beautiful, gray-flecked black locks. Immediately, she shoves the urge back down her throat, telling herself it's merely professional curiosity, an occupational hazard of being a lifelong employee of a beauty parlor. For over 20 years, She had been the go-to colorist and cut girl at the Curl Up and Dye Salon in the sprawling metropolis of Portersville, Georgia. She long ago lost count of how many heads she tinted, teased, and trimmed. But now that the world has hung up its going out of business sign and the members of the post-plague society have let their hair go, she longs to get her hands on a pair of clippers. On the other hand, Gloria realizes that she might as well face the fact that her interest in the texture of Bob Stuckey's greasy mop top is more than mere muscle memory. She has a thing for the man. But in this day and age, having a thing for somebody can lead to major problems. It can break your heart, or worse, it can get you killed.
Okay. Here we go,
Bob murmurs from about a half a step ahead of her, and the sound of his voice sends a cold current down Gloria's spine. She sees his hand shoot up, and then, in the light of their lanterns, she sees what he sees. Holy crap. She stops and stares and swallows hard as she registers the fact that the man slumped against the wall of the tunnel 30 feet away is missing the top of his head. He also seems to be missing his lower jaw. Dressed in the standard filthy dungarees and work shirt of a coal miner, with a blossom of inky dark arterial spray visible across the tunnel wall above him, he still holds his suicide pistol in one cold, dead hand at his side. As they move closer, the lantern light illuminates two more dead miners. One lies about 25 away from the suicide. The other is slumped against the opposite wall. Each of these men bears the grisly trauma of a point-blank headshot wound. Bob crouches down next to the suicide victim, with the quiet, world-weary authority of a seasoned homicide detective.
Looks like this one put the others out of their misery, then turned his own lights out.
Gloria pauses next to one of the other bodies and shines her light down at the gruesome remains. The maggots have long since had their fill of these poor gentlemen, and have left behind gray sunken shells inside the coal miner garb. Gloria shivers. Looks like this happened a while back. Bob looks around. He sees a set of iron steps embedded in the wall, and shines his light up at the top of the stairs, where a huge funnel of dirt slopes down through a manhole-style opening, blocking off entrance or exit.
Can't tell if they got trapped down here and then off themselves when they realized it was a lost cause, or...
He pauses, as though seeing the futility in the act of finishing the thought. Gloria looks up at the cave-in above the stairs. Or they shut themselves off on purpose. She looks back at the pistol, frozen for eternity in the dead man's hand. The outbreak happened about a year and a half ago, right? So this all could have gone down right around that time. She sniffs, her allergies acting up. Do you think the gun is still operational? Bob goes over and pries the .38 caliber police special from the dead hand. He sees old, faded, congealed candy wrappers on the floor around the man, a broken pencil, wads of paper smashed into the dirt. He checks the cylinder and finds 3 rounds remaining. Gloria finds a shovel lying against the wall near the other 2 men. This might come in handy, she says.
Let me see that for a second.
Bob takes the shovel and walks over to the steps, prodding the wall of earth descending from the ceiling, extruding through the manhole. Granules of sandy dirt avalanche down, the cave-in shifting above him.
Stand back, Glow,
he says with a grunt as he stabs at the earth.
Looks like the moisture has loosened it up.
A minute later, after Bob has grunted and groaned his way through several feet of earth, the cave-in gives, and he jumps out of the way as dirt starts flowing down the slope in one great heaving avalanche. The tunnel fills with dust, an acrid fog bank that drives Gloria back against the far wall. She coughs and holds the collar of her pink Hello Kitty sweatshirt over her mouth and nostrils. When the black dust finally clears, the steps become visible, leading up into the darkness on the other side of the manhole. Bob looks at Gloria.
I would say ladies first, but I probably should take point.
After you, Bob. She motions at the steps, and Bob gives her a nod. He pulls his Glock, clips the lantern to his belt, and starts up the risers. Gloria watches as Bob's upper body vanishes into the ceiling. Then she follows him up, neither of them yet comprehending the fact that the presence of the shovel indicates not only that the miners were able to get out, but that they wanted to be cut off, or wanted to cut off whatever it was that was in the room above them. Chapter 11. Lily and Tommy destroy 3 more walkers on their way across the switchyard, part of the same rail line that runs through Woodbury. Tommy runs in the lead position, clutching the crowbar, and Lily brings up the rear, running backward, firing controlled blasts with her silencer on, first at the remains of a brakeman, then at a former yard worker, and finally at another dead engineer. They hustle past water towers, station buildings, warehouses, shipping containers, and flatbed train cars lined up along loading docks under tall, dark, powerless streetlights. Lily deftly hops over track after track, each of which radiate across the weed-whiskered ground like the spokes of a giant wagon wheel. 18 months of neglect has turned the switchyard into a swamp of standing water, bugs, and rust, and creeping kudzu and vines of ironweed slather every inch of the place. They close in on the small 2-story frame building on the northeast corner of the property that faces the main track and parking lot. Lily figures the abandoned passenger station is the best bet for harvesting supplies, and she begins to scan the place for a way in. The tall, louvered windows are locked up tight and boarded, but there are numerous entryways, cloisters, and service doors. They reach the loading dock, leap onto the platform, hurry over to a closed garage door, and try unsuccessfully to open it. They move to an unmarked service door and find it equally impervious, fossilized on rusty bolts and hinges. Lily's internal alarm starts going off, not because she senses danger inside the building or even around the immediate vicinity, but because she gets a faint whiff of an odor on the wind that straightens her spine. The deep, black, oily nature of the odor speaks of swarms joining swarms joining swarms, and the last thing she wants to do is get pinned down in this godforsaken train yard. She points at one of the boarded windows. "Tommy, try jimmying one of those panels off." The boy shuffles over to a boarded, arched window and slams the bar's teeth into a seam. The sound of cracking, wrenching wood issues forth as Tommy Dupree puts everything he has into his levering motions. The window gives with a creak, the bar forcing open a narrow gap. Tommy pushes the slat inward far enough to allow a human body to pass. Barely. Tommy goes first, squeezing into the station house. Lily follows, cursing herself for having that second Pop-Tart that morning. She lands on a cold parquet floor, scarred with decades of scuffling shoe leather and the wobbling wheels of Pullman dollies. She takes in the cavernous room, the graffiti-stained murals, and the high, skylighted ceiling, its fixtures hectic with bats, its gantries clogged with spiderwebs and bird nests. She scans the detritus and overturned carts and trunks, the ransacked offices behind broken glass doors, the cash registers rifled behind ticket booths, the cluttered box office counters strewn with coin wrappers and old canceled tickets. The place has been picked over. Lily's heart sinks. In her dreams, she enters places such as this and finds cornucopias, treasure troves, steaming plates of roast beef and garlic mashed potatoes waiting for her on fine china. She turns to the boy and has just started to say something to him when he cries out. "Look!" He darts across the trash-strewn floor to the front corner of the station. "There's all kinds of stuff in there!" Oh my God. Lily sees the object of his excitement and hurries up behind him. In her sudden delight, she doesn't smell the stench building outside the edifice, nor does she hear the telltale noise way, way off in the distance, like the rasping of high-voltage power lines. "I can't believe this is still intact. Holy shit!" They stand for a moment in awe of the vending machine. Either too much of a bother for previous looters, or perhaps missed in the race to grab all the cash in the place, the machine stands untouched, at least 7 feet tall, an enormous convenience food dispenser with an unbroken glass front and coin-operated arm. Lily sees Gatorade, soda, juice, bottled water, tortilla chips, popcorn, candy bars, gum, lifesavers, licorice, fruit roll-ups, and even toenail clippers, disposable razors, toothbrushes, lint rollers, and travel pillows. "It's beautiful," Tommy exclaims, sounding as though he's describing the Sistine Chapel. "Look, there's even batteries." The awe in Lily's voice is palpable. She might as well be talking about the Fountain of El Dorado. "And Hostess fruit pies. I thought they stopped making those." "Well, let's look for something we can use to carry stuff. Come on." They scoured the disaster area of a station, looking behind closet doors, in vestibules, under ticket counters. In one of the offices, they find a big gray duffel bag marked Brinks, crumpled in a corner, emptied long ago by God only knows who. "Perfect." Lily grabs it, too excited to register the reeking odor of walkers building out in the neighboring woods. "Let's use that crowbar on the machine." They carry the duffel bag to the vending machine and try forcing open the service door in the back of the thing, but no luck. The lock holds tight, the forked end of the crowbar merely gouging the steel. Finally, Tommy says, "Stand back for a second." He swings the crowbar at the glass front as hard as he can. Glass erupts with a harsh, cracking noise, the shards falling into the guts of the machine, some of it spilling out across the floor, forcing Lily to jump back. They scramble to harvest all the goodies from the cubbies of the machine as quickly as possible, stuffing them into the huge duffel. Tommy wrenches some of the bigger items out with his crowbar. Soda cans roll across the floor, and small bags of pretzels and Funyuns topple. Tommy kneeling down and scooping up every last one, as though picking gold nuggets out of a stream. When they're done with the contents of the vending machine, they scramble to check out the rest of the rooms. In an old, musty administrative office, they find a treasure trove in a closet. 9-volt batteries, toner ink, paper, staplers, a magnifying glass, flashlights, paper clips, sealed cans of coffee, sweeteners, and powdered creamers. On the top shelf, Lily finds the Holy Grail. "Bingo," she utters gleefully, as she pulls down 2 ancient, shrink-wrapped, dust-filmed cartons of GE 60-watt light bulbs. They carefully wrap the bulbs in layers of paper towels from the men's room before putting them in the duffel. "That's getting a tad heavy," Lily says, lifting the bag off the floor. She is far too distracted now to hear the churring noises gathering outside, the buzzing sound of 100 garbled growls closing in. "How the hell are we going to carry this thing?" "Use the strap," Tommy suggests. "Yeah, but the problem is here, like this." Tommy snatches the strap out of her hands. He maneuvers himself under it and then lifts the bag with the shoulder. "See? Easy peasy." He starts to demonstrate how easy it is to walk with it, when suddenly its massive weight buckles his knees and he collapses to the floor, landing hard on his ass. "Yeah, I totally see what you mean," Lily comments, deadpan. Tommy looks down. "Fuck." "Easy peasy," Lily says, and she's just started to laugh when she suddenly cocks her head at an angle, as though hearing something important. "Wait a minute. Fuck. Fuck. What?" Tommy looks at her. "What's wrong?" "You smell that?" "No." "What?" She rushes across the room, hurrying over to the window they'd breached in order to get inside. Shit, she murmurs as she peers through the crack in the boards. "God damn it!" The figures appear in the distance, emerging from the trees and the road and the meadow like a slow-motion flood tide rolling across the grounds of the switchyard, dragging and bumping into each other, making those horrible raspy vocalizations that cause the hair on the back of Lily's neck to stand up. The swarm practically encloses the property, bees drawn to the nectar of human activity, human smells, human noises. Okay, let's not panic. Lily turns back to the room and chews a fingernail as she grasps for a way out. She looks around the room. No basement, surrounded on all 4 sides. Tommy picks up her nervous tension as if he's a tuning fork. "Is it a swarm?" He peers out the window. "Holy fucking shit!" He turns back to her. "Fuck! Okay, let's stay calm and let's watch our language." "Seriously?" "Let me think. I'm not thinking straight." The odor intensifies as though the foundation is suddenly a rotting, festering morgue. The noise outside rises like a turbine that's growling, turning, revving higher and higher. Maybe we can stay inside this place. Tommy peers back through the window slat. Maybe we can wait them out. Maybe they'll move on. That's a lot of maybes. Lily paces, does a 180, scans the walls, gazes into broken-down offices, thinking, panicking. I don't think we can stay here. Why not? She looks at him, swallows. Because I think they can smell us. Tommy looks back out the window, sees something important and points. Wait! He whispers now, afraid the front line of the horde closing in on the building might hear them. Hold on. What? He turns and gives her a grave look. I think I know how we can escape. For quite some time, Bob and Gloria gaze in silent awe at the strange interior of the Haddonfield Mining Company staging area, now illuminated in soft, green ambient daylight. The place is apparently sunken into the side of a hill, and what was once a labyrinth of service bays, storage rooms, and work desks, the entirety of the space encompassing the breadth and width of an airplane hangar, has been reduced to a surreal nest of creeping vines, roots, and mossy decay. All the surfaces look as though they've been in a snowstorm of mold and dust. The high casement windows have all been breached, either by weather or walkers. The roots of ancient pines probing down through the gaps and spreading tentacle-like across the walls and the floor. A carpet of moss and snot-green lichens covers everything. Desktops, cabinets, coal cars, tools, gas tanks, shovels, and augers. And the smell of humus and earth chokes the air. A chill wind ripples through the place, tossing leaves across the floor. Looks like the inside of the Keebler elf tree, Gloria remarks, pulling her Glock and cautiously crossing the spongy floor.
Watch those doorways.
Bob has his .357 in his hand and shuffles toward one of the exits. Many of the archways gape open, their doors dangling on ancient hinges. Bob doesn't like the odor coming from the far entryway, or the noise rising under the breeze swirling through the place. He approaches the open door. From the depths of a mossy green vestibule, a shadow looms, the grinding noise of mortified vocal cords. Bob raises the revolver. A lone male walker appears around a corner, 35 feet away. It drags along on bony, emaciated legs, its face so skeletal, and its mining garb so worn and rotted, it lends the creature an air of mummification. The moldering atmosphere of the underground has taken its toll on the thing. Its eyes, or what's left of them, shimmer in deep, hollowed-out pits. Its teeth drip black ooze as it comes for Bob. Bob aims the revolver and squeezes off a single shot, the bark as loud as a mortar blast inside the enclosed space, making Gloria jump. And the impact of the 125-grain metal-jacketed hollow point takes off the top of the creature's head. The soupy fluids of brain matter and blood spill out over the brim of the open skull as the thing collapses into its own spore.
Gloria?
Bob mutters calmly, backing away from the archway, hearing more noises.
We gotta get the fuck out of here right now.
Across the floor, Gloria crouches down by a row of storage lockers. I understand. I just think we should grab a few things first. This place is a gold mine.
Coal mine,
Bob corrects her, holstering his revolver, backing toward her, staring at the shadows looming just inside the far doorway, coming closer and closer, filling the air with the reek of stale feces and wormy meat. Apparently, the entire mining company, the mechanics, the secretarial pool, most of the middle management executives, turned and found themselves trapped in this nightmarish terrarium. Maybe they sought refuge here immediately after the outbreak. Maybe they returned here once they died. Regardless, they're all coming down that baby shit green hothouse corridor right now, and evidently they're famished.
Grab what you're gonna grab, Global. Let's get our asses in gear soon.
She breathes hard as she pulls a fuel canister sloshing with diesel out from under a cabinet. Look at all this shit, Bob!
God damn it, Gloria, we don't have time!
Bob hears the chorus of watery growling noises from inside the vestibule. He runs over and slams the broken door against the jamb, the stench of Walker practically choking him. He pulls a chair up to the rusted door and wedges it under the knob.
Come on, just grab the stuff and let's go.
Gloria stuffs sticks of dynamite, a first aid kit, axle grease, pickaxes and hacksaws, duct tape, an acetylene torch, miners' helmets with lamps, wrenches of all sizes, coils of rope, spools of safety fuses, and bottles of alcohol into her pack. She tosses aside canisters of oxygen, old boots, grappling hooks, and various pieces of miner's gear that she can't identify. Meanwhile, Bob is hurriedly shoving a stepladder across the leprous floor toward one of the high windows. The door on the other side of the room rattles with the pressure of walkers trying to get in. Bob positions the ladder under the busted casement.
Glo, come on! I'm not kidding! Now!
Bob climbs the ladder as Gloria hauls the laden pack across the room. She starts up the ladder, Bob grasping her hand and pulling her, when the corner door busts open and a phalanx of reanimated dead floods into the room. 2 of the creatures are females, their faces desiccated leather, their eyes like milkweed pods. Some of the others still wear the short-sleeved dress shirts and clip-on ties of office drones, probably former Haddonfield employees, their shirts soggy with bile and old blood. They come clamoring and gnashing into the room, their doll's eyes seeking movement and human flesh. Shit! 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 Gloria claws her way up the ladder behind Bob, who is already punching out the remains of the broken window pane above him. He reaches down to her and tries to pull her up when the closest walker, a former secretary with her reading glasses still dangling on chains around her mummified neck, reaches the bottom of the ladder and lunges at Gloria's legs.
Glo, look out!
Halfway up the ladder, Gloria feels a weird pressure on her left boot and glances down right at the same moment the walker goes for her ankle, the female's slimy teeth snapping only centimeters away from Gloria's exposed flesh above the top of her boot. Gloria cries out a garbled yelp and kicks and smashes her right boot into the sunken face of the dead secretary. The delicate bones of the thing's brow ridge begin to crack, and Gloria keeps kicking until the creature lets go of her and blood bubbles from its nostrils, mouth, and ears. Then, Gloria delivers one last tremendous kick to its forehead. Its skull finally caves in, and the female slides down the bottom of the ladder and hits the floor with a watery smack.
Hold on to my hand!
Bob pulls Gloria the rest of the way up as the other walkers reach the base of the ladder. He shimmies through the gaping window and then yanks Gloria over the sill and out of the jagged maw. Shards tear at her clothes and skin. Her overstuffed backpack nearly gets stuck, but she finally wriggles through and lands on a rocky spit of earth under the window. The pine-scented breeze and overcast daylight calm Gloria down, allow her to breathe. She lies curled in a semi-fetal position in a clearing swimming with cottonwood snow. Her head spins from the excess adrenaline as she rolls onto her back. She feels as though she's been underground for a year. She looks up at the sky. Bob kicks the ladder off the ledge, and it falls down into the room, smashing on top of the ravenous walkers. Gloria stares at the treetops. She catches her breath. Bob kneels next to her.
You okay, kiddo? Talk to me.
I'm good, she says, and gazes up through the canopy of massive, twisted, ancient live oaks. A thin, wispy layer of fog clings to the tops of the boughs and limbs, giving the forest a primordial cast.
You sure?
Bob hovers, looking concerned.
Absolutely.
Though her head is still swimming, she manages to sit up. The weight of her pack drags on her shoulders.
That was a close fucking call, wasn't it? A little too close,
Bob says, touching her cheek.
You sure you're okay?
She takes a deep breath.
Yep, all good. Let's get out of here.
He helps her up and takes a look around. The woods seem fairly quiet. There's a road visible through the trees, maybe 100 yards away up on a hill, a narrow black top ribbon cutting through the forest. Bob looks back at Gloria.
Can you walk?
She nods.
You bet.
They've just started toward the edge of the clearing when pain stabs Gloria's hip. She stumbles and Bob catches her.
Whoa, easy does it. Okay. Oh, I just need to rest a second.
She shrugs off the pack, drops it, and lowers herself to the ground. Bob kneels in front of her and she looks at him.
Sit down, Bob. You're making me nervous. Sorry.
He sits next to her on a soft padding of old pine needles.
You're a trooper, Glo. Can't believe you got all that shit.
She smiles at him, takes off her visor, runs fingers through her hair.
I couldn't resist. You never know when you're going to need a good stick of dynamite to liven up your next barbecue. You have a point there. Sadly. Thanks for getting me out of there in one piece.
She leans over and gives him a peck on the cheek.
Wouldn't have made it without you. Don't mention it.
He smiles at her, and she can see something sparkling in his dark eyes, something thoughtful crossing his deeply lined face.
Gotta watch each other's backs nowadays.
I thought I caught you watching my back the other day, she says with a smirk.
You got me.
Bob winks at her.
Guilty as charged.
He pulls a canteen from his pack and offers it to her.
You want to wet your whistle?
Don't mind if I do. She takes a big pull off the bottle and hands it back. She watches him take a drink. I understand that's about the only thing you're drinking nowadays. He gives her a nod.
Yeah, well, this or maybe a bottle of Coke if I'm feeling festive.
I'm proud of you, Bob.
Hey, anybody can quit. It's staying quit that separates the men from the drunks.
I believe you're there, Bob. You made it. They look into each other's eyes for a moment. Gloria gets very still. Bob reaches out and touches her hair, and she reaches up and touches his hand. He leans down, and she leans in, and they kiss. The kiss goes on for a long moment, the passion kindling in both of them, the heat rising. So much so that neither hears the distant low burble of a high-powered engine, the squeak of brakes, or the sound of 2 car doors opening.
I swear on my mama's grave I saw 2 people coming out of that shaggy-ass building down there.
Norma Sutter stands in front of a thicket of prairie grass and dense foliage, gazing down at the roof of the mining outpost. Her pinafore dress flaps in the wind, her abundant cleavage shiny with sweat. She squints to see better and cranes her neck, all to no avail. The rest of the forest is shrouded in shadow and the vaporous haze of cottonwood and dust motes, making it nearly impossible to discern any movement behind the trees.
I'm not imagining it, Miles. I'm telling you, I saw them. A man and a woman.
You think it was them? The folks from the tunnel? The young car thief stands behind her, fiddling with the lens dial on a pair of cheap binoculars. The Dodge idles behind him, both doors wide open.
I just don't know.
Miles looks through the binoculars. Wait, I think I see somebody.
Give him here, sonny boy.
Norma snatches the binoculars away from the young man. She looks through them, scanning the woods around the mining headquarters. At last, she sees the shadow-bound couple on the ground in the darker shade of the pines. She adjusts the focus. She stares through the lenses and lets out a little cluck of her tongue.
Well, well. Them 2 don't seem too damn worried about getting attacked.
Bob gently lowers Gloria to the ground, his lips still locked on hers. His senses fill with her smell. Wrigley's spearmint, soap, sweat, and musk. And his mind goes blank. Sound fades. Time stops. He doesn't think of Megan, his one post-plague crush, a relationship that crashed and burned in a charade of pity fucks and death. He doesn't think of his impotence, which has plagued him ever since he was wounded by a mortar blast in Kuwait during the First Gulf War. He doesn't think of those vague, wet dream recollections of being a horny teenager in Slidell, Louisiana, frequenting the Bottoms-Up Gentlemen's Club. He doesn't think of any neurotic obsession, fear, or insecurity. He thinks only of a calm sea, a great void in his mind, which is suddenly filled up with the essence of Gloria Pine. Her tender fingertips on his neck, her lips, her gray-green eyes, her breath on his face. The plague is gone, and the universe is now infinite in the cleft between Gloria Pine's breasts. Bob presses his face down into her bosom and breathes in her fragrance and feels as though he is floating. Gloria lets out a faint moan. She opens her legs and pushes up against him, and their faces return to each other. Something stops them. Bob pulls back, cupping her face in his hands. She looks up at him.
What is it?
What's the matter? Did I do something? Bob can tell something is wrong. He stares.
You feel hot.
What? Bob puts the back of his hand on her forehead.
You're burning up.
She blinks, swallows hard, looks at him.
Yeah. I thought it was... Oh, no. No. No.
Bob feels along the length of her arms, her hands, her fingers. He looks down her midriff, down her legs. He freezes when he sees her ankle.
Oh, God, no. No, shit!
She sees it as well now. Just above the top of her boot, where an 1.5-inch wide area of skin is exposed below the cuff of her capri pants, a small nip the size of a kernel of corn, a bloody tooth mark, probably from the former secretary that had lunged at her on the ladder. Bob hears a sound in the trees to the north and instinctively draws his revolver, then levers himself to his feet. He aims at the noise. Norma Sutters calls out to them.
"Excuse me? Hello? Folks?"
Her plump body wedged between two trees 50 feet above the mining company building. She musters up as much deference and humility as she can manage.
"Sorry to interrupt, y'all. Ain't got no gun or weapon. We mean no harm."
She waves her hands over her head in a gesture of amity, looking like a traffic controller on the tarmac of an airport, the flesh on the backs of her arms jiggling.
"Got one question for you. Is the lady named Lily by any chance? We're looking for a gal by the name of Lily Call."
Chapter 12. The station house window bursts open, 2 sections of loose boarding flinging off into space with the impact of Lily's shoulder. Tommy Dupree appears in the maw and leaps over the sill, vaulting through the air and landing awkwardly on the hard-packed earth outside the building, 50 pounds of vending machine products rattling on his back. Lily comes next, squeezing through the opening and jumping off the sill while gripping a Ruger with both hands, landing hard, instantly assuming the Israeli commando posture that Bob taught her, both feet planted firmly on the ground, maintaining her equilibrium fairly well considering that she has the equivalent of a small wardrobe locker roped to her back and a 20-gallon container of fuel oil tied to her waist. The air hangs heavy with putrid death stench and vibrates with the collective vocalizations of 300 or 400 walkers. Tommy doesn't hesitate, doesn't flinch, doesn't even break a stride as he heads directly for the main branch of the railroad tracks, despite the fact that the switchyard is virtually standing room only with walkers, scores of them blocking his path to the middle rails. Gripping the crowbar with white-knuckle pressure, letting out a garbled war cry, he puts his head down like a miniature fullback and barrels toward the tracks. He slams into a column of 3, flinging 2 male adults and a female teenager backward, stumbling willy-nilly on their heels, emaciated arms pinwheeling stupidly, knocking others down. The closest line of walkers, amounting to about 20 or 30, turned their seemingly inebriated attention toward the commotion, locking their shark-like gazes onto Tommy. Swarms move with the hive behavior of bees, the outer rings of dead still oblivious to the humans in their midst, even while the inner rings begin to react chemically, turning, locking sights on their prey, slowly trundling heavy-footed toward the warm, breathing bodies. If asked to describe the physical bearing of a walker, the first thing to pop into the average person's head might be a stroke victim, albeit an angry, starving, ferocious, cannibalistic stroke victim. But a swarm has a different feel. When walkers swarm, and sometimes grow to a number that would be considered a herd, they present dangers and wreak catastrophes that are almost biblical. They coalesce into a tsunami of menace that strums the deepest chords of primal genetic terror in a person. They are an inexorable force of nature. Lily Call feels this bone-deep fear start to work its cancer on her as she follows the boy toward the central track. Dizziness threatens to slow her down, make her stumble, steal her breath, and perhaps drag her down into a deadly blackout. She keeps her gaze locked onto Tommy Dupree. The boy charges along in front of her, banging into walker after walker, screaming, kicking, flailing at them, pushing one into another at the last possible instant to avoid getting snagged or bitten or slashed by the grinding of countless teeth. He buries the crowbar in the cranium of a ragged old woman with stringy, mossy white hair and pulls it out with a high-pitched howl that resembles the hysterical bark of a hyena. He slashes the crowbar wildly at another phalanx lunging at him from the left. Lily moves in tighter behind him, the Ruger gripped hard in her cupped hands. She squeezes off a few more blasts, scoring headshots on either side of the boy, sending body after body to the ground in a wet, crumpled heap. Her heart races, her vision blurring with each jarring stride as she pounds across the rocky earth. Tommy reaches the turntable area, vaults across the outer rails, and scrambles up onto a lone flat car in the center of the tracks. Lily arrives at the turntable one instant behind the boy and has to fire on 3 more walkers, each one of them old, gray, desiccated, and cadaverous. By the looks of them, former farm people in tattered work garb. Her blasts send chunks of aged skulls flying in mists of pink matter glistening in the sun, the dead collapsing to the ground, returning to the stillness that should have claimed them in the first place. On the flat car, Tommy has already shrugged off his pack and grabbed one of the giant tree limbs. Behind him, Lily climbs onto the rear of the conveyance and slips off her cargo, dropping the huge duffel and fuel canister onto the rotting planks. The flat car rocks slightly as Tommy chooses one of the larger tree limbs, picks it up, and then steadies it on the ground next to the car. He glances over his shoulder. "On my signal, push!" Lily yells from the rear. She, too, has grabbed one of the limbs and now holds it as one would hold an oar on a boat. By this point, the herd is shifted, drawn to the commotion on the flat car. Many of them awkwardly cobble over corrugations of iron rails and weeds, approaching the central flat car, their talon-like hands clawing at the air, their blackened lips as gelatinous as earthworms undulating around decaying teeth. "Let's go already!" Tommy yells, jabbing his tree limb as one of the first walkers to reach the flat car claws at his pant legs. "Together now! Push!" Lily pushes off with her tree limb as hard as she can, while Tommy does the same at the front end of the car. At first, the flat car barely budges. The wheels, mired in the undergrowth, slowly rip through tangles of weeds, squeaking noisily. Lily puts everything she has into the limb, pushing as hard as she can. She feels the train car breaking free of the kudzu and wild ivy and ironweed, and the steel wheels beginning to turn on the rail. More walkers arrive, clamoring to claw their way onto the car. Tommy slams his boot down on a small female, staving in her skull as he pushes the car away from her. The diminutive body collapses and falls under the conveyance, the rear wheel slicing her legs in two. The flat car picks up speed. Now Lily finds herself pumping the limb as though rowing a boat, pushing and lifting, making the car roll faster and faster down the main branch. Near the front, Tommy also furiously prods his limbs against the ground until something unexpected happens. "We're going downhill!" Lily yells from the rear, the wind in her hair now, the car vibrating wildly as it picks up speed on the downward slope. She drops her limb. Tommy drops his bow and crouches down, holding on to an iron bolt to steady himself. The track gently curves to the right. A few walkers along the edges of the rails stumble into the car's path and get mowed down. The wheels thump over mortified flesh. Tommy screams as a severed arm tumbles across the car's deck, spewing a leech trail of blood. The flat car rolls faster and faster. The woods on either side start to blur past them. Lily guesses they're already traveling 30 or 40 miles an hour. The wheels drum on the rails, a syncopated beat, the tempo speeding up. Tommy starts to giggle, and then his giggle builds to outright manic laughter, and then his manic laughter builds to a triumphant wail. "Try to catch us now, you fuckers! Eat shit! You puss bags! You slugs!" Lily glances over her shoulder and sees the herd receding in the distance. Just like that, they've slipped free of the plague of locusts. She turns and sees the car careening down the gentle decline, and all at once she finds no humor in their situation. She finds nothing to celebrate. They are on a runaway train car with no way to stop.
"Hold still, please, Chloe. This is the only way."
Bob Stuckey crouches on the claustrophobic rear bench seat area of the Dodge Challenger as the car climbs past 60 in the northbound lanes of Highway 19. Bob has his pack open between his legs, his makeshift surgical instruments on an old newspaper spread out across the floor mat in front of him. Gloria lies on her back, her shoulders pushed up against the far door, her legs sprawled across Bob's lap.
"I don't know, Bob."
She clutches his arm, writhing, drunk with terror.
I don't know about this."
She covers her face with her hands, her tears leaking through her fingers. It sounds as though she's giggling. Her visor has come loose and dropped to the floor, and her graying, dyed hair is matted with flop sweat. She hyperventilates. I don't know. Okay, honey, look at me. Bob gently turns and cradles her face in his hands. You have to try and breathe and stay as calm as possible. We only have a few minutes here, and there's no other option. It'll go down a lot easier if you just stay as calm as possible. He strokes her hair. Look at me, Gloria. It's old Bob. You can trust me. You're going to make it, and you're going to outlive us all. Now, sweetie, I want to hear you say it. What? You want me to what? I want to hear you say you're going to outlive us all. Come on, say it. He finds a small plastic bottle between his legs, squirts liquid sanitizer onto his big gnarled hands, and rubs it in. Lying on the newspaper between his feet are many of the items they found in the miner's office, including the acetylene torch, the rubbing alcohol, the first aid kit, the can of axle grease, and the hacksaw. He looks at her. Come on, Gloria, say it. Good try, Bob. She lets out a dry, mordant little giggle. She sounds intoxicated, woozy with fear. Good fucking try. Hey! He drops the bottle and grabs her by the shoulders, shakes her a little and speaks crossly. Who's the medic here? 3 tours and an honorable discharge in Iraq. I may not be able to make a souffle rise, but when it comes to emergency field surgery, I'm a goddamn Florence Nightingale. So do what I say and repeat after me. I. Say it. I. She swallows. She looks at him, her eyes groggy and disoriented. I am going to outlive all you guys. Her voice breaks, crumbles into a half sob. I'm going to outlive you guys. That's exactly right. And when you're right, you're right. So now I'm gonna... A voice from the front interrupts. Sir, the young car thief pipes up from behind the wheel, calling out over the roar of 320 cubic inches. Can I make a suggestion? Make it quick. Bob reaches down to his belt buckle, unclasps it, and quickly pulls it free from his pant loops. Gonna need all hands on deck in a second. Sir, I'm not trying to tell y'all what to do. The young driver gazes nervously up into the rear view at the action in back. He does this while simultaneously weaving around standing wreckage, a maneuver that would send most drivers careening off the road and into a ditch. There's a rest stop coming up where we can pull off, and maybe you can do this on a picnic table inside the shelter. No time for that. Bob grabs Gloria's wriggling leg and holds it still, grasping it about 2 inches above the wound. The bite mark has already turned livid, a ringworm of red around the kernel-sized gouge. It has been Bob's experience, especially when dealing with gunshot trauma on the battlefield, that sepsis can spread within minutes. It can cause blood pressure to plummet, bring on shock, and make organs fail like the winking out of streetlights in a storm. Unfortunately, he has no standard of reference by which to triangulate the relationship between his lifetime of experience with infections and trauma and the time it takes for a person who has been nipped to ultimately succumb. Just keep heading north on 19 as fast as you can without rolling this thing, he orders the young driver. Keep an eye peeled for Hannah's Mill, and that's where you turn west on Jeff Davis Road. But what about just stay on course? Bob's voice is as taut as a piano string. He palpates Gloria's leg, feeling along the tendons below her knee for the pulse of her perineal artery. I need to get her back to the infirmary we got set up in the tunnel as soon as possible. I can only do so much out here in the sticks. The woman in the passenger seat twists around and aims her calm, friendly eyes at Bob. You want to give her the rest of that hooch? Bob, was it? Yes, ma'am, that's right, sure. That would be good. Bob nods and starts winding the belt around Gloria's leg, making a field tourniquet as best as he can. He guides the end through the buckle and yanks it back hard, cutting off the blood flow to the site, making Gloria moan softly, murmuring something that nobody hears. 5 minutes ago, they had given her half the pint of Mad Dog that Norma Sutters stashes in her purse, along with a couple Seconal tablets that Miles Littleton keeps in his glove box. Now the narcotics and booze have begun to dampen Gloria's nerve endings. Here you go. Norma leans forward and thumbs open the glove compartment. She fishes through the contents, pulls out a couple of small objects, turns, and proffers the pill bottle and the half-empty pint of Mad Dog, as though they are peace offerings between 2 tribal elders. She takes a couple more of them Seconals with the rest of that Mad Dog? Oh, Lordy,
She ain't even gonna remember what year it is.
Another terse nod from Bod.
Okay, fine, good. Let's get him down her gullet quick.
They give the narcotics and booze to Gloria, who coughs and chokes, but eventually guzzles it all down. She burps and hiccups and heaves a couple of anguished sobs and manages to say,
Never thought I'd be partying with Bob Stookie quite like this.
She laughs. Actually, it's more of a pained hunk than a laugh, and it comes out on a breathless sigh, narcotic-fueled, feverish, and shot through with morbid irony.
Party!
She giggles and giggles, and her giggles deteriorate into garbled muttering that soon trails off. Bob positions a towel under her foot. He picks up the hacksaw.
You can't dance, Mrs. Stookie?
Gloria slurs her words now.
Come here often?
More giggling.
Haven't I met you somewhere?
Bob saws into the meat of her ankle.
Get ready to jump!
Lily's voice, barely audible in the wind, reaches Tommy Dupree's ears an instant before he sees the bend in the tracks a couple 100 yards away. He lies prone, on his belly, clutching an iron lever mounted to the side of the flat car, squinting against the gusts as the flat car plunges toward the sharp curve, the drumroll noise of the wheels rising, the undercarriage beginning to shudder and quake. He can see Lily Call 10 feet away, also on her belly, holding onto the iron apparatus mounted to the front of the car. Tommy realizes Lily is absolutely right. They're going to fly off the rails as soon as the car hits that turn, and they'd better bail and quickly. Tommy manages to lift himself up without losing his heavy pack or getting swept off the edge of the car. He crouches with his skinny legs pinioned under him, coiled and ready to spring. The wind stings his face, makes him squint. On 3! At the front of the flat car, Lily also rises to a crouch and prepares to vault off the hurtling conveyance. For one insane moment, crouching there in the wind, his brain crackling with panic, Tommy thinks of Saturday morning cartoons. He remembers the Roadrunner occasionally going over a cliff, perhaps on a boulder or a log, and at the very last possible instant, as the boulder is about to crash to earth, executing a graceful little jeté and hopping off the rock at the perfect moment in order to land safely next to the enormous crater formed by the impact. Is what they are about to attempt just as physically impossible? Is Lily's crazy gambit here equally antithetical to the basic laws of physics? 1! The bend in the track looms closer and closer, 100 yards away now. Tommy lowers his center of gravity and prepares to make his Roadrunner-worthy leap. Reflector poles and tree trunks flicker past them as though they're approaching light speed. 2! Tommy grips the iron lever beside him so tightly now that the vibrations travel up his tendons and strum his funny bone, sending jolts of electric current through him. He holds his breath and focuses on the blurry figure of Lily, her back turned to him at the front of the flat car. Tommy straightens, girds himself, tells himself he's ready to rock and roll. The sight of Lily Call, 10 feet away, her shoulders tense and hunched over the front end, her legs cocked under her, her knees pointed outward like a baseball catcher's, fills Tommy Dupree with a sudden and unexpected injection of courage. To paraphrase his late father, Tommy would follow this woman into the valley of the shadow of death. 3! Lily's piercing wail sends a bolt of fresh electricity through Tommy as he jumps. Arms flailing, legs churning, Tommy soars through space, and for the briefest of moments, the entire length of the enormous conglomeration of wood, iron, and metal beneath him seems to plummet away from him, as though the earth has suddenly fallen away, or perhaps opened up to swallow the flat car into its bottomless maw. Tommy lands hard on his shoulder and rolls, his backpack tearing open and spilling its contents of tortilla chips, lifesavers, toenail clippers, disposable razors, toothbrushes, lint rollers, and travel pillows across a half-acre stretch of turf. The pain slams through him, a sledgehammer to the small of his back. He lands at an awkward angle against the trunk of a live oak. The impact knocks the breath out of his lungs and sends Roman candles across his line of vision. Gasping, trying to sit up, he sees Lily landing next to him, the weight of her own huge knapsack slamming down on top of her, causing her to let out an agonizing grunt of pain. A tremendous thud rattles the ground, followed by a metallic shriek, and then silence. Something blocks out the sun all of a sudden. Something enormous in the sky, which rips Tommy's attention up to the heavens directly above the treetops. The entire 60-foot-long flat car has gone airborne. It rotates lazily in midair for a brief moment as it arcs out across an adjacent clearing, creating a surreal sight worthy of a Magritte painting, a locomotive in a fireplace, and then it crashes down in the grass beyond the bend. The ground shakes. Tommy lets out a sigh of air, half shock, half relief, as he watches the massive train car roll another 100 feet or so before shuddering to a stop, several of its axles and wheel assemblies broken loose, lying in the tall grass behind it. The air fills with a nebula of dust, which rises over the crash site and quickly dissipates in the breeze. Tommy lowers his head and lets out another breath of relief. Lily has already managed to rise to her feet about 10 yards away from him. "You okay, buddy?" she asks as she limps over to him. "Yeah, I think so." Tommy levers himself up to a standing position. Dizziness makes him reel for a moment. Yeah. She inspects him for wounds. "Looks like you're fairly unscathed." "What are you talking about? I'm totally scathed. I was totally messed up." She manages a tepid chuckle. "Yeah, totally. But it was better than the alternative back there." They hear a noise. Maybe a twig snaps somewhere behind the trees. Maybe shuffling footsteps. Lily looks over her shoulder and doesn't see anything. Yet. "No time to pat ourselves on the back," she says, indicating the shadows of the woods. "All the noise of our little derailing incident is going to draw the swarm. Come on." Lily starts picking up the goodies that fell from Tommy's pack. "Let's get this stuff squared away and get the fuck out of here." Gloria's shriek erupts in the enclosed space of the Challenger's interior with the force of an air raid siren. Blood backwashes all over Bob, and the car swerves. Bob bears down on the ankle, the handle of the hacksaw getting greasy from all the blood gushing up across his arms, down into his lap, and into the seams of the seats. He knows he has to hurry. The slower he cuts, the more agonizing the pain. Gloria screams louder, a raspy, keening howl, the sound of it almost metallic, as Bob feels the serrated blade of the hacksaw catch suddenly on the bone, the teeth seizing up, getting caught on the hard, brittle core of the ankle. He bears down harder. Gloria passes out, her body going limp. Almost, he utters between grunts as he tries to hack through her ankle, making her entire body jiggle with each nudge of the blade. "God damn it!" Bob barks as he pulls the blade loose. "Gotta get better leverage!" "Oh, dear Jesus, Lord, Lord, Lordy, Lord!" Norma Sutters murmurs desperately into her lap, shaking her head, her shoulders slumped with sorrow. Bob awkwardly pulls himself out from under the bloody mess of Gloria's legs, and he struggles to reverse his position, squeezing around between the seat backs and Gloria to face her and then quickly finish the job. She moans. Partially conscious, delirious with pain, her head lolling, she manages to utter a name. "I'm here, darling," Bob softly replies, and then says, "You gotta bite the bullet one more second, and then it'll be all over." Time seems to slow down, and suddenly stop, as Bob saws through the remaining few centimeters of Gloria's bone, and finally wrenches the woman's right foot off, along with 3 inches of her leg above the ankle. They slip out of Bob's blood-slimy hand, and splash into the puddle of blood that has formed on the floor mats. Blood floods the seats. Bob quickly grabs the torch and the lighter, and thumbs the acetylene on and sparks the nozzle. The faint thumping sound of the blue flame makes Norma Sutters jerk in the front seat, despite the fact that she's looking away, having averted her gaze from most of the procedure. Bob cauterizes the ragged, oozing stump. The odor wafts, and it's terrible, a black, acrid fume. But the worst part isn't the smell. The worst part is the sound. The sizzling of burning flesh will live in the memories of each inhabitant of that Dodge Challenger from that day on. Bob feels something coming undone inside him and lifts his finger off the torch's trigger, extinguishing the flame and leaving a black tarry cap on the stump. Somehow, Miles has managed to keep the car at a steady 50 miles an hour throughout the entire procedure. Now he glances in the rear view at the aftermath and the rear seats. "Is it done?" "Yeah, it's done," Bob says, looking down at the severed foot, wiping his blood-slick hands on a towel. "Get us home as soon as you can.
We ain't out of the woods yet.
He regards the profuse amount of blood that is gathered on the floor mats, on the seats, and even across the inside of the windows. It looks like an animal was slaughtered. He drops his towel on top of the amputated foot and then tenderly puts a hand on Gloria's cheek. She tries to speak, but all that comes out of her is a thin, wispy whistle of a sigh.
You're gonna make it, kiddo,
Bob tells her softly, stroking her feverish cheek. She barely utters a labored response.
I'm sorry, Bob, but I would. I'd rather not.
Bob looks at her. He tips his head to the side in confusion. He's not sure he just heard what he thinks he just heard. He leans down and puts his ear next to her quavering, blood-spattered lips.
Say again, sweetie.
The words come out on a sigh, a dwindling volume to the voice.
I would prefer to just, have this be the end of the whole mess for me.
Chapter 13.
Wait. What?
Bob Stuckey stares down at the face of a woman at peace, the eerie calm setting into her pug-nosed features. Bob panics.
No.
She gazes up at him through eyes filmed in opaque, milky suffering.
Let me go, Bob. Fuck no!
Her eyelids sink shut.
It was a good run.
He shakes her.
Stay with us. There's no reason. Not like this. Too much work. Gloria!
He shakes her. He slaps her face. He's not even aware that he's crying.
There's no reason! Glo! Don't do this!
Her eyes are closed now, her head lolling to the side, a soft death rattle wheezing out of her. The faintest words cross her lips, so soft that Bob has to press his ear against her quivering mouth.
Make sure I don't. Gloria! Come back. Gloria!
On a long sigh.
Please make sure. Gloria!
He shakes her and shakes her. He can barely see through his tears. He tastes copper on his tongue, salt and tarnished metal as the car swerves. Bob falls against the door, shaking Gloria, picking her up. He hardly notices the change in her tiny body. She has gone completely limp.
Gloria! Gloria! Gloria!
Bob holds her and cries, and realizes the fingertips of his right hand are softly pressing the tender flesh above her carotid artery. She has no pulse. This fact reaches Bob's brain 1 nanosecond before he realizes what he has to do now. He frowns, a tear breaking over the edge of his lower lid and tracking down his face. He pulls the .357 from where it was wedged between the back of his belt and his lower back. He collapses into the seat next to the flaccid, blood-soaked remains of Gloria Pine. Then, Bob Stuckey has a ferocious cry. Inside the sealed windows of the muscle car, the blast pops dry and flat, like a balloon bursting, as the vehicle roars around the bend at the intersection of 74 and 18. The distinctive report of a .357 Magnum, when muffled by the glass and steel enclosure of an automobile and further dampened by the hank of bunched fabric pressed down on Gloria Pine's skull, emits a low thump that could easily be mistaken for a tire blowing or a chassis banging over a pothole, were it not for the unmistakable subsonic slapback echo that now drifts over the treetops of the adjacent woods. To anyone within a 5-mile radius, it might actually bring to mind the rattle of heat thunder on the horizon, or the low boil of a storm brewing in the far distance. Lily Call pauses on the trail and looks up. She tilts her head and listens, waiting for more gunfire. But there is only that single muffled blast, now fading on the breeze. For a moment, She wonders if she imagined it.
Did you hear that?
She whispers to the young man coming up behind her. Tommy lets out an exhausted sigh.
Hear what? No, what was it? Walkers? No, I thought I heard. Never mind.
Lily takes a deep breath and shrugs the straps of her knapsack a little higher on her shoulders. The straps have been digging into the nape of her neck for the last couple of miles, and now she hears the faint creak of her tendons as she stretches. Her pack weighs a ton, and feels like it's getting heavier by the moment. She tightens the bracing strap.
Let's go. Come on, we're almost there.
They continue down the stony, weed-riddled path as it snakes through the thickets. 5 minutes later, they see a glint of metal through a break in the foliage, and Lily silently shoots a hand up, stopping Tommy cold in his tracks behind her. She hears voices. She motions for the boy to get down, be quiet, and hold on for a second. She crouches, wriggles off her pack, fishes in it, finds her binoculars, and peers through the lenses at the shimmer of purple metal flake steel visible through the pine boughs and tall grass. Lily registers the sight as the front quarter panel of a car parked near the access hatch. It looks as though the car's doors are open, and that there are silhouettes of 3 or more figures sitting inside the vehicle. A female voice says something like, "You gonna be okay?" A gravelly male voice says,
"Just give me a second. I'm fine. Just a second."
Goosebumps crawl over Lily's flesh. Several things register in her all at once, in equal measures of panic, confusion, and a weird kind of relief. She recognizes Bob Stuckey's voice, but it sounds wrong, drained and trembly, and she does not recognize the other speaker. Suddenly she hears the sound of shuffling footsteps behind her, in the middle distance behind the trees, and the low buzz of growling. Lily twists around and makes eye contact with the exhausted boy.
"Tommy," she whispers, "listen to me. Get your crowbar out."
"Okay, but shh,
just do it and follow my lead."
Lily reaches down to her pack, puts back the binoculars, and zips it shut. Then she draws her Ruger from her belt and whispers,
"We got walkers coming up behind us, and I'm not totally sure what's going on up there with Bob and those folks, or who they are or what they want. But I can tell something's wrong. I'd prefer to be safe rather than sorry."
The boy nods.
"I get it. I'm ready. Let me do the talking."
Another nod. Lily rises, silently pushing her way through the foliage toward the clearing, and grips the Ruger with both hands, commando style, despite the fact that it's out of ammo. As she approaches the parked car, she sees that it's a vintage hot rod, and it ticks and diesels like a snoring beast as it sits at an angle across the clearing from the tunnel hatch. As she gets closer, she sees Bob kneeling down just outside the car's open rear door, as though praying, or supplicating to someone sprawled across the rear seats. His shoulders are slumped miserably, as if his head weighs 1,000,000 tons. An enormous black woman in a threadbare floral dress and bouffant hairstyle stands outside the front passenger door, wringing her hands, waiting respectfully for Bob to finish whatever it is he's doing. Lily pauses just inside the netting of cattails and undergrowth that borders the clearing. She holds her gun on the portly woman. "Bob?" Bob's head rises with a start.
"Lily?"
He looks around.
"That you?"
Lily steps out of the thicket and into the clearing, followed by the boy who holds his crowbar as menacingly as possible. "What the fuck is going on?" Lily demands as she trains the Ruger's muzzle on the woman.
"Who are these people, Bob?" "Take it easy, Lily girl."
Bob speaks in halting wheezes, as though he can barely muster the energy to talk.
"They're friendlies."
Lily starts to say something else when the car's driver's side door squeaks open, and a young African-American in a ragged hoodie and tight little braids emerges from the car with his hands up. "We're on your side, ma'am." "That's right." The portly woman has her hands up as well, and she gives Lily a convivial little smile. "I'm Norma, and this here's Miles." "Bob, what's wrong?" Lily sees the lump of a figure lying, prone across the back seat, and sees the backwash of deep scarlet blood spattered everywhere inside the car, and it makes her stomach clench. She can hear the scuttling of walkers closing in from the woods. Is that Gloria? What happened? Is she okay? Bob looks up at Lily, and with a single forlorn, anguished shake of his head, he tells Lily practically everything she needs to know about what happened without uttering a single word. She lowers her gun, and she feels her chest go cold. She bows her head and lets out a heartbreaking sigh. Oh, God. Don't tell me she was... And you had to... Lily? Tommy's voice from behind her penetrates her shock. We've got 4 cold ones coming. Lily turns and shoves her gun in the back of her belt, then draws her rusty machete from its makeshift sheath on her hip. Get back, Tommy. But what about just do what I say? Lily sees the foursome pushing through the foliage about 30 feet away, a female and 3 males in ragged work clothes. They have at least a couple of years of decay on them, their faces and exposed areas of flesh so corroded with decomposition that they appear to be made of stucco, with ghastly veneers of gray tissue vacuum-formed around their sharp-angled skulls. Lily starts to say, "Get back, everybody," and she hears a commotion behind her, and then hears Bob's voice barking suddenly, "Get out of my way!" A blur of movement draws Lily attention over her shoulder. She sees Bob lurching away from the car, then stumbling toward her. Before Lily can even react, Bob has grabbed the machete out of her hands. "Bob, wait!" He lunges toward the creatures, snorting with the mad pent-up rage of a wild bull. He lashes out at the first one, striking it between the pectoral and shoulder, making a divot so deep in its neck the entire cranium peels away and flops down across its back. Black blood oozes out of the crater the instant before the thing collapses, its head dangling upside down against its own back, the threads of arteries and tendons like the defunct wiring of some out-of-service automaton. "Bob?" Lily stares as Bob Stuckey grips the rusty, blood-stippled machete with both hands. Babe Ruth at bat, about to swing for the fences, and in front of his horror-stricken, wide-eyed fellow survivors, proceeds to lose himself in his labors. Lily Call has seen Walker massacres before. She witnessed the man known as the Governor rain the hellfire of an entire armada of 50-caliber machine guns and countless automatic assault rifles down upon a swarm of the things that had accumulated outside the fences of a medium-security prison in rural Georgia. The clouds of blood mist and physical matter that had filled the air from that particular mass annihilation would live for a long time in her memory. She had seen smaller, more intimate slaughters as well, like the time that band of men in Marietta had cornered a small group of biters in a loading dock area behind a Piggly Wiggly and systematically dismembered them and crushed their heads with the rear tires of massive steak trucks. But she has never, ever, witnessed anything quite like this. Bob's cathartic rampage through that cluster of decrepit monsters continues with a wide, arcing roundhouse blow of the machete to the skull of the next closest walker. The blade strikes the thing's cranium just above the earlobe and slices the top 2/3 of the skull clean off, as though Bob were popping a bottle cap. The ragged scalp and partial upper fascia jettisons into the air on a meteor tail of pink matter, falling end over end to the ground. What remains is a hollow, trembling mess of bloody, mantis-like mandibles and exposed teeth that shudder and chatter for a surreal instant before the rest of the body gives out and folds to the ground. The surviving 2 creatures make futile attempts to close in on Bob, but the dark-haired man turns to them and makes primal grunting noises as he quickly, efficiently, rams the tip of the blade, one at a time, hard at upward angles, through the roofs of each of their mouths, into their nasal cavities, through their parietal lobes and out the tops of their skulls. One by one, the remaining walkers drop. Bob takes in a deep breath and lets out an enormous howl of pure, unadulterated rage, shot through with the agony of loss, right before he slams a boot down as hard as he can on the head of one of the fallen. The wet crunch makes most of the spectators behind him turn away in disgust, all except Lily. She puts her arm around Tommy Dupree and hugs his face against her midsection and softly whispers, "I really don't think you need to see this." Meanwhile, Bob still has that machete gripped in both hands, and now he starts in on the motionless heaps. He slams the blade down on the moldering limbs and torsos as though beginning a vigorous session of firewood chopping. Lily watches almost stoically, morbidly curious. The truth is, she loves this man, and she's proud of him. Proud of him for kicking his drinking habit, proud of him for finding the tunnels, proud of him for saving the lives of his fellow survivors, for being the voice of reason, being loyal, and being a friend. For days now, Lily has noticed little signs that Bob had grown sweet on Gloria. And now this. Lily continues to look on without much emotion as Bob slashes and hacks and buries the blade in the gristle of mortified joints and stubborn bones, yanking it out with the help of his boot sole. Blood spatters and blows back up at him, freckling his gaunt face, stinging his burning eyes. He looks like a demonic entity, and it begins to stir something deep inside Lily Call. Whatever it takes, she thinks. Bob separates a leg from a hip with a single blow, a head from a neck, an upper body from a lower body, and the blood covers him now. Is he reenacting the amputation fiasco in the car? Is he exercising something deeper, thornier? Lily can't quite figure it out, but that's okay with her. Bob gets winded. The blade gets stuck for a moment, and Bob lets out another feral yawp, almost simian in its guttural rage, but with pain in it. That's when Lily realizes that Bob is crying as he flails at the dead things. His tears fly off his face with each furious blow, his hitching sobs mingling with his hyperventilated gasps. "Okay," Lily says, taking a step toward him. "That's enough now." She comes up behind him as he continues to lash away at the things on the ground. His energy has begun to flag. His head droops as he slashes wildly, fecklessly now. The sobbing has gotten the better of him. Lily cautiously approaches. She puts a tender hand on his shoulder and he jumps, taken aback by her touch. He turns and meets her gaze with his own feverish eyes, which now glitter with the madness. "What? What?" Lily doesn't say anything. She just nods her head and keeps her hand on his shoulder and keeps nodding and doesn't look away. Bob lets the sobbing take him down into her arms, the grief loosening his grip on the blood-lacquered machete. The weapon falls to the ground. Then Bob loses it. Lily holds him and lets him cry it all out until there's nothing left. They reconvene underground, in the private shadows of a side tunnel, in the deathly silence. They sit on folding chairs and hold paper cups of instant coffee, and stare gravely at the floor as they listen to Norma Sutter's low, raspy voice give them the bad news. Some of them had hoped the preacher was dead, figuring he must have perished in the chaos of the hordes that descended upon Woodbury last month. Now they sit very still and listen with morose expressions on their faces, as Norma explains how the preacher stumbled upon her church with his 2 minions. She described how he joined her in her search for Miles in the infamous caravan, and how the preacher had taken over the convoy when the priest had died, and how he had started acting strange and erratic almost immediately. Then she pauses. The others wait. She licks her chapped lips as she looks into the eyes of each listener for a moment, gauging if and when and how she should tell them the gist of what she came here to say. At last, she clears her throat and says very softly, very casually, "He's building an army out of walkers." Lily asks her to repeat what she just said, and Norma does so, and Lily has to hear it a third time just to register its meaning and to take stock of it. Her memories of the governor's horror shows in the Speedway arena with their gladiatorial walkers and grisly death matches are still fresh enough to make nightly appearances in her dreams, and she remembers all too well the defensive swarm of biters positioned outside the fences of that horrible prison at which she had killed Philip Blake. She also remembers Jeremiah attempting to wreak havoc in Woodbury by knocking down the barricades and summoning the herd. Over the 2 years since the plague broke out, many others have certainly tried to use walkers in various ways, as shields, as weapons, or as threats of one kind or another. But nobody else has ever attempted it in such a delusional and grand manner as this. "I'm afraid you're going to have to explain just exactly what you're talking about," Lily says finally to the plump black woman sitting across from her. Dressed in a threadbare floral print dress that strains at the seams with her girth, her décolletage brimming with massive bosoms, Norma Sutters has that warm, open, earthy face that Lily has always associated with nurses, teachers, and den mothers. Against her better judgment, Lily finds herself trusting this woman and her young juvenile delinquent of a companion. Norma takes a sip of her tepid coffee and says, "Couple nights ago, I couldn't for the life of me sleep one wink, tossing and turning all night to beat the band. I guess the old brain was just overloading with worry. So I got up and took a little walk." In another part of the tunnels, a child's laughter rings out, making Lily and the others jump. Barbara Stern has agreed to keep the kids occupied with games and lunch while Norma and Miles tell their story to the rest of the adults. But every few moments, the children inadvertently make their presence known. Lily looks down at her hands and sees that they're shaking ever so slightly, and this touches off some deep well of anger within her. She has barely come to terms with Gloria Pine's death. They have to bury her sometime soon. And now this. "I was about to go back to bed," Norma's saying. "I've been walking for maybe a half an hour, circling the entire wagon train, when all of a sudden, I see a light flickering in the woods. Thought I was seeing things at first. I get a little closer and I hear noises coming from behind the trees and that flickering light. I hear the most god-awful sounds coming from that light. Human screams, walkers growling and such. I don't know what all." Norma shudders, and Lily feels a cold finger tracing down the back of her spine, eliciting a wave of goose flesh along the back of her legs, as she recalls Jeremiah's used car dealer face and huge pompadour of hair. David Stern sits on one side of Lily, and Harold Staubach on the other, and she can sense each man's hackles going up. Tommy Dupree sits behind her, and she can hear the boy's steady breathing, and it sounds rapt, transfixed. Bob is off somewhere dealing with his grief over Gloria. Lily's worried about him. He's lost a lot in recent months. "Curiosity killed the cat," Norma goes on, "and I get close enough to finally see what's going on in them woods without giving myself away." She pauses again, and the others hang on her silence. "Now, remember, this crazy preacher's been gathering these walkers for God knows what reason, and he's been torching them biker fellas for days, and I have no earthly idea what he's up to. But I just know deep down in my bones it's all connected. So I hide behind a tree, and I see the strangest thing." The momentary pause weighs down on Lily like a massive yoke. "The preacher's got about 10 of them monsters, and I'll be damned if it don't look like he's playing with them." David Stern knits his brow. "What do you mean, playing with them?" Norma looks down and takes another deep breath, as though the very telling of this continues to take a physical toll. "Down in Florida, they used to have them dog races. Terrible things, those races. All that hard-earned money getting lost on liquor and shenanigans. Anyway, I don't know if y'all ever saw one of them things, but there's a little metal rabbit on a rail that pops up and then charges around the track so the dogs will chase her real good." Sorry, ma'am," David breaks in. "All due respect, what the hell does this have to do with the price of peace, if you'll pardon my impertinence?" She gives him a hard look. "I'm coming to that part if you just be patient with me. My mama always used to say that if words were nickels, I'd be a rich girl. Anyway, you gotta understand, all the pieces to this puzzle was right in front of me. The torturing of them bikers, the collecting of walkers as though they were bobblehead dolls." She breathes deeply and shakes her head. "One of the RVs we found along the way, it had toys in it. Must have been a rich family, and the children must have been spoiled and all because there was remote-control cars and planes and such, rechargeable batteries, cameras, electric guitars, and all kinds of gadgets you would never think you'd have any use for. But guess what?" She glances around the dimly lit tunnel at all the dour faces soaking in her story, and she takes a deep breath. Here it comes.
Here I am, looking at this crazy-ass preacher leading this pack of walkers around like they were square dancers having a two-step. He's got this contraption rigged up, a battery-operated tape recorder, and a camera light flickering, and a little remote-control car. And it's playing a recording of men dying. I swear, I ain't never heard anything like it. The screams of men being tortured to death, and a light blinking like that. She makes a pulsing gesture with her plump little hand. She shakes her head. But before she can continue, Lily Call says what she's thinking in a soft whisper, almost under her breath. Pavlov. All heads turn toward Lily. She feels their hot, nervous gazes on her skin. She says, Pavlov. As in Pavlov's dog. He's training them. David Stern looks down and barely utters the words. Can't be done. Well, now, see, that's kind of open for debate, Norma counters. Because I saw them walkers following that thing around like sheep following a sheepdog. That preacher's got a remote control, one of them little toggle switches, and he's leading them monsters around like the damn Wizard of Oz. And that ain't all. She swallows air for a moment. A couple of days later, he's got half the men in the place with him, off on some mission that he wouldn't tell the rest of us about. I was real curious by that point, so I got Miles to drive me out to the Barrens, this flat meadow not far from our camp, where the preacher's got an old tow truck. Miles Littleton, still an unknown quantity to Lily, mumbles something from his seat behind the plump woman. Lily can't quite make out what he's saying. He speaks softly, his face downturned, his voice garbled with nerves and self-consciousness. Go ahead, Miles, Norma Sutters urges. You tell him what he was doing. The young man takes a deep breath and looks up. Okay. So we've been using this tow truck for hauling shit, right? Pulling wreckage off the roads and shit. But when I saw what they were doing with that motherfucking truck that night, I could not believe what I was seeing. They had one of them bikers strung up on the back, tied to the tow arm like a carcass of some dead animal, bleeding and shit, and he was making... The young man falters for a moment, at a loss for words, vexed by the very act of describing what he'd seen. Norma twists around, pats the man's knee, and says, Take your time, brother. It's okay. Miles breathes as he remembers the terrible thing. This dude was still alive. Barely. He was screaming like a stuck pig, and they had one of them photo strobes blinking. And they were driving pretty slowly. And then I realized that the swarm was following them. The monsters were following that horrible noise of that dude dying, and then I realized what that preacher was doing. Lily stares at him. What the hell was he doing? He was teaching them things. Lily gapes. I get that part, I get it. But why? What's the end game? What the fuck is he teaching these walkers to do? For a long while, Miles and Norma just look at each other. In fact, they take so long to get up the nerve to answer that the pause begins to make Lily and the others in the tunnel that day feel very uncomfortable. Chapter 14. The preacher stands alone and unarmed in the purple glow of twilight on the soft, spongy ground of a secluded meadow. The air has grown still at day's end, the chill of night rolling in, the motes of cottonwood tufts drifting lazily through the dying rays of the setting sun. The drone of cicadas and crickets provides a white noise in his head, lulling him into a state of transcendent semi-consciousness, a state of meditative reminiscence. Click, flash. Jeremiah blinks, momentarily blinded by the ghostly corona of light lingering for a moment on his line of vision. He blinks again until his eyes adjust. Now he can plainly see that the walkers have surrounded him, some of them close enough to reach out and touch,
The black odors and the low snoring of mortified vocal cords weigh down upon him with tremendous force, and yet, not a single one of the 100 or so reanimated corpses makes a move. It's as though they're idling, stationary, their mind screens frozen, their calcified, desiccated brains processing some external stimuli for which they have no bandwidth. And this causes Jeremiah to feel ennobled, buoyant, all-powerful, standing there, engulfed in the horde like this, surrounded by myriad silhouettes of the dead, the shimmer of 100 pairs of eyes mesmerized now by something in the sky. Click, flash! Amidst the throng, the preacher recognizes a former mail carrier to his immediate left. The thing that was once a man, now leaning to one side with its uniform torn and gouged, and spilling entrails into the mail sack that still hangs habitually from its emaciated shoulder. It has been carrying its own entrails around like this for months, as if searching for an addressee. Many of the others have now aged and weathered and decomposed to the point of being unrecognizable as anything other than sacks of putrefied flesh that still manage to nominally walk. Someday soon, some of them will collapse and begin to disintegrate into the earth, never once pausing from their autonomic mission to feed. Will their teeth continue to gnash long after the soft tissues have turned to dust? Click, flash! Click, flash! Click, flash! Jeremiah holds his ground, standing rock steady, and he doesn't worry, doesn't panic. He hears his father's voice, the deep whiskey rasp that held him in such horrible awe in the darkness of his bedroom most nights. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for I am the meanest son of a bitch in the valley. Jeremiah remembers the time his father had sent away for the beehives, one of the old man's crackpot ideas for augmenting his military retirement pay and pension benefits, turning the backyard of their Jacksonville ranch home into a honeybee colony. Jeremiah had been in the throes of adolescence that summer, and had been acting out, rebelling, drinking and smoking, and hanging out with the loose girls from that heathen institution known as Florida State University. The old man had gotten drunk one night and dragged his only son out to the hives. And what he did to the boy on that hot August night still scars not only the flesh of the preacher's right arm, but the marrow of his soul. The echo of the old man's boozy baritone still reverberates in Jeremiah's dreams. Boy, it's high time you learn to inoculate yourself against the temptations of worldly women, the venom of the queen bee. Jeremiah remembers starting to scream like a stuck pig as his father gripped his arm and then thrust it down into the guts of the largest hive. It had felt as though 1,000,000 needles were penetrating Jeremiah's flesh that night, setting his arm on fire, spreading waves of horrible, hot electric agony up his tendons and nerves. He remembers passing out from the pain a minute later, the fading sound of the old man's voice. "Is the only way, boy. The scourging of the flesh. The only way to become immune. The only way to withstand the poison of them fast women." Click, flash! Click, flash! Click, flash! Click, flash! The intermittent pop of silver light shakes Jeremiah out of his terrible reverie, drawing his attention over his shoulder. He can see the small crane that rises off the back of the rusty, battered tow truck 30 yards away. He can see the photo strobe that he'd found in that Chicago family's RV, now duct-taped to the apex of that block and tackle, a beacon flashing, implanting the horde with silent, behavioral triggers, the invisible strings of the puppeteer. The air trembles with the grating, grinding music of human suffering, the screams of the dying, now pouring out of ceramic loudspeakers. It soothes Jeremiah in the strangest of ways. He can feel the mob around him like schools of fish flocking around a living coral reef, ignoring him, brushing past him, spellbound by the noise and the light. The preacher feels almost safe within this putrid sea of cadavers. He is finally inside the hive, and he is immune, and he is all-powerful, a messenger from God, the last evangelist on the dying earth. He remembers the early autumn chill that had swept through Jacksonville that summer, turning the honeybees into sluggish, intoxicated revenants of what they once were. He remembers waking up right after a scourging on the hard ground next to the hive and feeling nothing. A cold, numb, empty sensation spreading through him. He remembers seeing the flesh of his blood-pocked arm where all the stingers had embedded themselves in the skin like the barbs of long-stemmed roses. By that point, it had felt like his arm was asleep, prickling faintly, and yet he harbored no hatred for his father, who still stood over him like a red-necked golem, like an angry Old Testament god. The old man had been smiling. Surely, he was thinking of the life cycle of the honeybees. When the honeybee stings a person, it can't pull its thorny stinger back out. It leaves behind not only the stinger, but also a large part of its abdomen and digestive tract, plus a bundle of muscles and nerves and tissue. This enormous abdominal rupture kills the honeybee, but not before it flutters off into the ether, an engine dieseling long after it's been shut off. "My bees," Jeremiah Garlitz thinks, rather grandly surveying the outer boundaries of the horde that surrounds him. He breathes in the cloud of rubbery, rancid meat odors, the stench of flesh deteriorated long past its crumbling point. He raises his sinewy arms to the heavens and rejoices. "My bees. My faithful bees." Late that night, she finds him at the end of a side tunnel earmarked as a temporary infirmary. The air smells of peat and musk, and the minimal light comes from a single battery-powered lantern sitting on a stool at the end of the tributary. At one time a channel for an underground spring, its walls of petrified roots long since worn smooth, its floor of hard-packed earth covered with tarp, the side tunnel now houses the meager sick bay. Makeshift gurneys of wooden planks on carpenter's sawhorses sit along each wall. A metal shelving unit with boxes of gauze, tubes of ointments, cotton tape, and bottles of homemade grain alcohol stands in the corner. Bob Stuckey sits on the floor next to the metal shelves, cross-legged, his head slumped, his back turned to the visitor who approaches cautiously. He hums softly, an old country tune that he's absently mangling. A body draped in a moth-eaten blanket lies on the sawhorse next to him, a pale hand dangling down. Bob clasps the tiny hand in his own, holding it as though comforting a small child, rather than a full-grown woman who'd once wore the visor that now sits cradled in Bob's lap. "Bob?" Lily's voice rises barely above a whisper. She can tell what's going on, and the sight of it presses in on her heart like a vice. "Bob, I'm sorry, but we have to talk." He doesn't say anything. He just keeps humming a song that Lily suddenly recognizes. Early on, Bob used to always play a George Jones cassette on his big old Dodge Ram pickup, and his favorite tune, one that he had practically worn out, had been "He Stopped Loving Her Today." Now he hums the soggy tear-jerker with off-key indifference. "Bob, we have a situation, and I need to—" Lily sees something that stops her in her tracks. Cold panic slithers down her midsection like an icy snake. In setting up the little medical bay, Bob and Lily had procured several different kinds of antiseptics. One type, rubbing alcohol, they had found in profusion, in fact, cases and cases of it, in the rear of the derelict drugstore. Another type Bob had retrieved from the burned, charred husk of the Dewdrop Inn, the Woodbury watering hole that he had frequented during his drinking days. He had remembered seeing bottles of Everclear and grain alcohol behind the bar that had been untouched by fire.
"There's always a situation, Lily. Haven't you noticed?"
In Bob's other hand, the one that isn't clutching the hand of the deceased, is a fifth of grain alcohol. He takes another sip and winces at the burn.
We live in a goddamn constant situation.
Lily's spirit deflates. Almost audibly, her hope and faith in Bob and in Bob's future and in the future of all of them drain out of her in a long, agonizing sigh.
Oh, Bob. Don't do this. Come on.
He looks down, ashamed.
Leave me be. You can't let this destroy you.
She gently maneuvers her way past the gurney and sits down on the floor next to him.
There isn't a person here doesn't know what it's like to lose somebody.
He looks everywhere but at her.
I don't need a shrink. I just need to be left alone.
She looks at the floor. Out of the corner of her eye, she can see the old cotton visor that Gloria used to wear. So old and worn, the balloon letters spelling out the phrase, "I'm with stupid," have faded to shadows, sitting on Bob's lap. Every few seconds he puts the bottle down and caresses the visor, as though it's an infant sparrow needing to be nursed back to health. Lily shakes her head.
She was a great lady.
Bob swallows another gulp.
That's for sure, Lily girl.
He slurs her name as though it contains an extra L, then adds,
That's for sure.
She was a badass.
Yep.
We'll have a service.
That's fine, Lily girl. You do that.
His voice is flinty now, sharp with thinly veiled rage.
You have a service. I'll make sure to show up.
Lily takes a deep breath and lets a few moments pass before saying, I remember when Josh took that shot in the head by the butcher. I thought I would never see the light of day again. I just figured it was over for me, and there was nothing I could do about it, and why even bother, but I didn't give up. I just figured, one day at a time. Goody for you. Bob, come on.
Don't do this to me.
He gives her a look.
I'm not doing anything to you. It's not about you.
His bark makes her jump.
It's not always about you.
She swallows back the urge to slap him.
That's not even remotely fair. Life ain't fair.
His voice softens.
It never was. And it sure as hell ain't now.
Lily shakes her head, gazes at the floor, and allows another long, anguished beat of silence to ensue while Bob quietly drinks and stews in his misery. Lily tries to take deep breaths and figure out how to get him back. She needs him now, maybe more than ever. She starts to say something else, but thinks better of it. Who is she to give advice to this man? Who the fuck does she think she is? Trying to be a role model, trying to force a particular mode of behavior on Bob Stuckey. Lily has her own foibles, her own fucking problems. Her nerves are as tightly wired as Bob's, maybe more so. And she's noticed that her temper is quicker. Her shaking worse, her nightmares more intense since they've been driven underground. Almost every time Lily manages to get a wink of sleep, which is somewhat infrequent since they've been in the tunnels, she weathers a storm of claustrophobic, bloody, inchoate scenarios. Bus doors closing on her dead father. Her friend Megan dangling on the end of a rope. Her former lover Josh lying decapitated in a trench of carnage. And every iteration imaginable of traps, cages, locked chambers, prison cells, and endless featureless tunnels going nowhere. But the one that recurs the most, the one that truly haunts her, is an almost photorealistic rendering of the day she killed the baby. You know it's coming. It always starts the same way. You're ducking down behind a bullet-riddled truck while the air outside that Georgia State prison boils with gunfire. You always rise up the same way. your teeth gritted, your high-powered rifle clutched in sweaty hands, the taste of old pennies in your mouth, and the washed-out sunlight glaring in your eyes as you see the amorphous figure 75 yards away, trundling across the hot zone of the prison exercise yard. It always goes down the same rabbit hole. You feel the cold pressure of the scope on your eye, the blurry image behind the crosshairs, an anonymous man with the bomb cradled against his solar plexus, and that huge, greasy, sweat-glistening head with the eye patch yelling at you, "Take them out now!" Always the same. Always. Always the blast and time-lapse that echoes up in the sky, the distant blood mist enveloping two figures, one large, one small, a woman and a baby, their blood mingling in the ether like a sacrament. The anonymous man is a woman. The bomb is a baby. You just killed both, in cold blood, on the whim of a madman. Lily closes her eyes and tries to drive the inexorable horrors from her thoughts. "You know what?" she says, looking at Bob Stuckey. "Give me some of that." He looks up at her, his eyes unfocused, bleary, vexed by this turn of events. "What?" "This?" "Hand it over." She grabs the bottle away from him. She takes a sip, and the liquid scrapes down her throat like barbed wire, then ignites a fireball in her gut. She flinches and gulps down the rest. The fourth or fifth swallow turns her tonsils and uvula and soft palate numb. Bob studies her, watches her shudder at the burning liquid agony. "That's one way to get me to quit," he says with zero humor in his voice. "Crack another one," she says. "Yes, ma'am." He turns and pulls another glass bottle from the middle shelf. He twists off the top and takes a healthy pull. Then he hands it over. She drinks, wipes her mouth, and looks him in the eye. "We don't have the luxury to grieve anymore. Are you listening to me? Do you understand what I'm saying? That was for the old times." He nods. "Loud and clear." Then Lily tells him exactly what Norma and Miles told her about the preacher. "I knew we should have finished off that sick fuck when we had the chance," Bob grumbles after processing the whole thing. The bad news seems to sober him slightly, turning him cranky, like a petulant child who's just been awakened prematurely from a nap. "Goddamn, the holy rollers are worse than the fucking biters." "That's not all of it," Lily informs him. "The worst part, the part she saved for the end, is what he's got planned for the unveiling of his grand little experiment." Bob doesn't say anything, just takes another sip of the hooch and waits. "He's planning an invasion." Lily levels her gaze at Bob. The liquor has already started to work on her equilibrium, burnishing the edges of her vision with gauzy, soft-focus sunspots. "An invasion of what?" "Us." Bob holds her gaze for a moment, wavering a little as though laboring to maintain his end of the stare-down. "How the hell does he think he's gonna—" He stops. They share a glance and Bob looks away. Lily can see he's thinking it over, chewing on it. In his drunken state, the realization comes in waves, like a tide rolling in. Finally, he looks at Lily. "Maybe it's time for us to just pack it in. Cut our losses." She scowls at him. "The fuck are you talking about?" Now she has added a few consonants, the F coming out like F. She swallows bile. "You talking about surrender? You won't surrender this maniac? Are you insane?" "Did I say surrender? I'm not talking about surrender. Cool your jets." "Then what are you saying?" Bob rubs his pouchy, bloodshot eyes. "I'm talking about cutting our losses and hightailing it out of here." Lily is silent for a moment. Bob studies her.
I know what you're going to say. I know what you're thinking.
What am I thinking?
You never abandon your beloved Woodbury to some cracker redneck preacher with a chip on his shoulder. Am I close?
Lily looks down.
Something like that.
She meets his gaze.
Bob, we can take this guy. We did it once before. We can shut him down, go preemptive on his ass. What, a hit squad? Yeah, we could. Now you're the ones insane. Bob, listen to me. This Yahoo is a lot more than some backwoods Bible thumper. He's crazy. And he's the worst kind of crazy. He's organized. He can pull the wool over people's eyes. He can marshal large groups. You understand what I'm saying?
Lily sighs. The initial rush of intoxication is now transformed into a full-on wave of woozy nausea. She belches silently and feels her stomach acids churning.
Trust me. He can be stopped, she says finally. Lily girl, sometimes retreat is the best defensive strategy. Scorched earth, we don't leave him shit, and we make sure— No, stop!
Lily takes quick breaths in a feeble attempt to stanch the warm knot of nausea tightening her gorge. She shakes her head.
I will not destroy my town for one evil asshole. It ain't your town, Lily. It belongs to all of us. Well, right now, it belongs to the Walkers, and I'm not going to turn tail and run. That's a chicken shit move, Bob, and you know it.
Bob throws the bottle against the wall. The glass shatters, the liquid exploding. It makes Lily jump. Bob's voice gets low and taut.
That's right, I'm a chicken shit. I'm a coward. Why? Because I'm a natural-born survivor. It comes with the coward part. Being a fucking hero gets you killed.
He stares hard at her, pursing his lips bitterly.
Listen, you get a better idea, I'm all ears. Yeah, I got a better idea. I say we find this prick and put him down like a rabid dog. Lily, blow the cobwebs out of your head. This guy's surrounded by his little army of followers, plus now it sounds like he's found a way to weaponize the goddamn stiffs. You want to traipse into that, you be my guest. I'm leaving. And I'm taking them kids with me, and whoever else has the common sense to come along, they're welcome to join me.
Lily kicks the legs of the shelving unit and knocks over a row of bottles, which tumbles to the floor, several of them shattering.
Fine. Whatever, go. I'll deal with this guy myself. Lily.
She springs to her feet, nearly knocking over the entire shelving unit.
Go, take off! What the fuck are you waiting for? Hold your horses. Calm down.
Bob speaks softly now, standing, taking her by the shoulders.
I know you have big dreams for this place, and you see us getting it back one day, and that's great. I get that. But these people don't deserve to die just because one young lady's maybe got a bigger set of balls than everybody else. Go!
The volume of her voice makes her stagger, the dizziness and adrenaline and nausea coursing through her all at once, nearly knocking her over. She has to grab the shelf just to steady herself.
Go with God. I'll pack you a fucking lunch.
Bob faces her with clenched fists, his face reddening with fury.
You can't just dictate!
He abruptly stops. The sound coming from behind them, from the tunnel's entryway, instantly stiffens his back and cuts off his rant. Lily hears it too, and it diffuses her rage like a bucket of cold water splashing in her face. She turns and sees Tommy Dupree standing in the opening, silhouetted by the lantern light behind him.
I know how we can beat them bastards,
he says softly, his voice coarse with gravity. In his father's ratty cardigan sweater, his ruddy little face furrowed with grim determination, Tommy Dupree looks far older than his years. His fists clenched at his side as he stands in the arched opening, his slender form framed by worm-eaten beams and ancient earthen walls. He looks like a miniature sentry in some obscure Hummel diorama. Maybe his time spent in the wild with Lily has changed him. He seems to have aged years over the course of the last horrible months. Bob turns and looks at the boy.
Sorry, son. I didn't catch that.
Tommy takes a deep breath and repeats what he just said.
I know how we can send each and every one of them shitbags back to the hell they come from.
Lily looks at Bob, and then glances back at the boy, and then feels a hot, greasy belch coming as she falls to her knees and roars vomit across the tarp-covered tunnel floor. Part 3. The Great Steel Oblivion. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents. Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16. Chapter 15. In the carbon-black darkness of the clearing, as crickets drone and engines tick in the background, a voice seems to come from thin air, deep and modulated like the voice of a god, disembodied at first as the eyes adjust. We pretty much near lost half our people tonight. Just slipped away under the cover of darkness. The voice pauses, and the listeners, 5 men, each in their 3rd decade of life, former laborers and tradesmen, all spooked now as never before, look down at the ground and remain silent. I understand the latest ones to leave with the Thorndikes, the voice says, and pauses again, a single orange speck of light from a cigarette glowing brighter as the speaker takes a vigorous drag off a hand-rolled smoke. The Kentons, too. Another pause. I understand people are troubled by my methods. The events of the last few days. My experiments on them bikers. People don't appreciate my using walkers in such a manner. Can I say something? James Fraser speaks up. The young man with the sandy hair scratches the side of his grizzled cheek as he measures his words. He runs fingers through his hair. It's just some of the folks with kids, they get a little nervous with this kind of stuff going on. I understand that, Jeremiah Garlett says with a paternal nod. In the darkness behind the glow of the cigarette, his deeply lined face and prominent jaw give off the feeling of a jack-o'-lantern. They have every right to abandon the cause, and I wish them all well. Every last one of them. Look, I'm not saying we don't... James abruptly falls silent. His thoughts, the big speech he wanted to make, all of it tumbling down like a house of cards when he hears another surge of atonal screams and growls, hundreds of feral vocalizations, swelling on the night breezes from the east. He glances over his shoulder and takes another reluctant look at the area beyond the circle of trucks and RVs, down a wooded slope and across a vast tobacco field. In the darkness, it's impossible to make out the details of the throng, except at regular intervals when the strobe flashes. Each time the light flickers, a swath of the superherd is momentarily illuminated, from this distance looking like a vast leper colony stuck in mid-shamble. A necropolis of the damned, all of them hunched and mesmerized by the noise and light, some of them reaching futilely for the source of this magical Pied Piper of screams, the sea of mottled, putrid faces, a monolithic audience waiting for a play. After only a couple of flashes, James Fraser has to look away, back at his spiritual guide. They don't understand what we're up against, the preacher says, as he tosses the butt and pushes himself off his perch on the stump. They don't understand the savagery of these tunnel dwellers. The preacher ambles over to the edge of the clearing and gazes out of the meadow of the dead, the arrhythmic pulsing and flickering stamping their after-images on the darkness. His coat-tails flap in the wind. His big hair tosses. His voice comes out deep and cold. These people took us in. Me and my congregation, what was left of us, offered us refuge at first. But they had no intention of giving us solace and succor. He turns and gazes at James and the 4 other men. Chester Gleason looks up from the ground, his eyes gleaming with nervous tension. What'd they do? They began to kill us. One by one, the preacher utters in a low tone, the lies flowing off his tongue. The idea was to feed us to the swarm outside the walls of their town. Use our bodies as fodder, as bait, as a way to keep the herd at bay. They were going to slaughter all of us. He looks at each man now, and the way he fixes each of them in a smoldering gaze makes James Fraser look away at the dark horizon. They did it before and they'll do it again. Do it to some poor, unassuming family that hobbles into their web. The preacher pauses and lets out a sigh. He kicks the dirt. I understand if y'all don't want to be a part of this mission that I've been charged with by God. We didn't say that, Chester murmurs mildly as he stares at the ground. The preacher takes a step closer to the men. In the book of Revelation it says, He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Chester keeps looking at the ground, but he's starting to nod. I'm going to bring the medicine for these people in the form of the dead. An army of the damned. An eye for an eye. Another big dramatic pause. Gonna make damn sure these people never victimize another survivor again. Gonna take that town back in the name of the Lord, and whoever wants to be along for the ride is welcome to stay with me. Whoever wants to leave has my blessing. Now Jeremiah turns his back on them, and appears to be pondering the flickering horde in the distance. But what he's really doing is waiting. He doesn't have to wait long. The next afternoon, the caravan sets out on its grandiose mission in earnest. The 10 remaining vehicles cut a swath of dust and carbon monoxide up the Interstate 75 basin, avoiding the petrified wreckage blocking much of the 4-lane by traveling single file along the arid ditches running parallel to the shoulder. The 3 heavy-duty trucks lead the convoy, setting the glacial pace at about 3 miles an hour. The 5 RVs rumble along behind them, some of their roofs occupied by gunmen armed with sniper rifles. Jeremiah's command center, the rust-spotted, eggshell-colored Winnebago formerly owned by Father Patrick Murphy, rolls along near the end of the procession, fishtailing over intermittent patches of decomposing remains, throwing a wake of dust and rotting organic matter off its massive rear wheels. Behind the Winnebago rattles the big tow truck, with its enormous rear crane, its gigantic twin rear tires crunching through the detritus. They pass a mile marker, its battered green facing faded and bullet-riddled. They are exactly 35 miles from the town of Woodbury, Georgia. At this pace, their estimated time of arrival would be dawn the next day. Very few of the drivers or passengers in the caravan keep close watch on the sea of shadows behind the tow truck. Every so often, on the shifting winds, they hear the watery, creaking chorus of growls and the fading screams of the prisoner. If they chose to do so, they could catch a glimpse in their peripheral vision of the long shadows of countless shambling bodies. The mob is growing. With each passing hour, more and more of the dead come out from behind dilapidated, derelict barns and groves of sickly oak trees and piles of overturned cars. Most of the convoy's members are somewhat disturbed by this spectacle, but these are the repressed, the sheep, the stalwart. They now have their own flashing strobe light, in the form of Reverend Jeremiah Garlitz. At this moment, in fact, this volatile guiding force sits on a bunk in the rear of his RV, while his minions, Reese and Stephen, take turns at the wheel. Jeremiah sits barefoot, in shirt sleeves and trousers, gazing into a small rectangular mirror that he has canted against the headboard. Using a disposal razor and skin lotion, he carefully shaves the last nubs of hair from his head, leaving behind a pale dome of mottled skin, as smooth as a peach. He believes now, like the monastic clergy of yore, that he must shed all his pride and vanity and worldly possessions before he leads his flock into battle. He ponders his blotchy, reddened face. Aside from the psoriasis, he looks very presentable. He finishes, wipes his scalp with the towel, and then moves to the window embedded in the rear door, a slat of grimy glass no wider than a necktie, and peers out. In the ashen sunlight, he can see the throngs of his new congregation. They are 100 strong. Their styles of clothing, their facial features, even their genders, worn away by the rot and ruin of maggots and weather and time. They move almost as one, brushing against each other languidly, twitching in the pale sun, bumping shoulders and snarling in excruciating, oblivious hunger. The hundreds of sets of teeth visible even at this distance, like tiny kernels of white corn in the rotten husks of their faces. Silver light blinks across their rank and file, apparent in even the bright daylight, flashing with metronomic regularity, the strings of the puppeteer, and accompanied by the echoes of human suffering. The onyx-colored tow truck spews a swirling fog bank of smoke from the homemade biodiesel, the miasma rising out of its vertical stack, curling around and engulfing the rear of the truck, where the human bait writhes in agony on its sacrificial gantry. The subject is the last of the surviving bikers, a big, pear-shaped bearded Viking with teardrop tattoos and enormous sagging pectorals, now reduced to a sobbing mess in his shit-stained underwear and bloody lacerated skin. A loop of barbed wire is wound around his expansive belly, gathered behind him, and connected to a winch. Each time his shrieking fades and deteriorates to garbled sobbing, the tow truck driver thumbs the winch button, and the barbed wire tightens slightly, eliciting more agony. The previous subject had not been as boisterous, and had died prematurely, the shrieking going silent shortly after the winch had literally cut the man in half. But the preacher had learned from the fiasco, and now the pressure is being applied with great moderation, calibrated for optimum pain rather than catastrophic injury. Plus, the Viking's girth should provide hours and hours of racket, the slow bleed-out unlikely to kill the man for at least a day or two. The preacher had found that the beasts responded better to live sound than recorded. He turns away from the window and wipes the last spot of lotion from his gleaming, shaved head. He tosses the towel, looks around the RV's cabin, and decides to rest. Tomorrow will be a big day. He sees his Bible on a shelf above the sleeping berth to his left, tented open to Revelations, the chapters and verse he'd been studying the previous night. He picks up the worn black book and lies down and continues reading about dragons and horsemen and slaughtered lambs and angels clothed in clouds and the number 666. At length, he falls into a deep and profound sleep and dreams he's sitting on a stone bench on the edge of a precipice overlooking a valley of scorched, burned, blackened woods. He wears a tunic, as though from another time. The wind tosses his hair. "Are you my son?" The voice comes from behind him. A soothing, oily voice. The kind of voice one would expect a snake or a lizard to have if snakes or lizards could talk. Jeremiah turns and sees a tall, dark man in a long black robe. The man's face is gaunt, sunken, cadaverous, his long, coal-black hair loose. His yellow eyes seem to absorb not only the light, but all the energy around them. A pair of knob-like polyps extrude off the top of his skull like horns. His smile makes Jeremiah's flesh crawl. "I've never even met you," Jeremiah finally replies in a breathless, nervous whisper. Then he says, "I have a church. I'm tax-exempt." The tall man glides over to the bench, takes a seat next to Jeremiah. "I bid you greetings at long last." "Are you?" The tall man nods. At this close proximity his flesh looks iridescent, like the scales of a fish. He smells of smoke and embers. I am indeed, he purrs. You once thought of me as your adversary. You're the enemy. The man raises a tapered index finger, its nail sharpened to the point of a claw. Ironically, no. I am no longer the enemy. I am merely a cog in the machine of prophecy. Prophecy? The man nods. You are the son, the follower of fate, and this is the rapture, and it is your destiny to turn the entire human race. Jeremiah doesn't understand. Turn them to Jesus? The laughter that tumbles out of the tall man recalls a million barking hyenas. Oh, dear no! That's adorable. Your destiny is no longer to proselytize Christianity. That ship has sailed. More oily laughter. On the contrary, your destiny is to turn every human being into the walking dead. Each and every last soul. This is my destiny, Jeremiah repeats, as though learning a lesson in school. The tall man puts his arm around Jeremiah, the touch of the man's hand like a cold compress. It is written. You shall be the last of the human race, the last true human on earth. You shall rule the hordes as a king. You shall become a god in human form. In the dream, Jeremiah jerks back with a start when he realizes the tall man has his father's bulbous, ulcerated nose, his father's droopy, bloodshot eyes, his father's crow's feet and cleft chin and 5 o'clock shadow, and Jeremiah opens his mouth to say something, but nothing comes out. His father smiles. Barbara Stern hurriedly gathers the 6 children at the end of the main tunnel near the west exit. She catches her breath, adjusts the straps of her pack, then pulls her unruly gray curls back into a ponytail and quickly snaps a rubber band around the hank of hair. Clad in her anachronistic floral print muumuu with the gun belt around her midsection, Barbara surveys her young charges. All right, here's the deal. She speaks to the kids in her patented tone, a mixture of 2 parts den mother and 1 part drill instructor, and she fiddles with her gun belt as she talks, securing the cumbersome pistol with its long suppressor into the holster. We're going to go up top on a little adventure. Like a field trip? Tiff Slocum asks with wide-eyed wonder. One of 2 identical twins, the cherubic little 8-year-old girl wears the same soiled jumper as her sister, Mercy Slocum. The 2 girls have been compulsively wearing the thing since the group went underground. Weeks ago, Barbara had discovered a forgotten box of hand-me-downs in the courthouse basement earmarked for Goodwill, and had brought different outfits into the tunnel. But the twins insisted on dressing in the same threadbare jumpers every day of their lives from that point on, forever and ever, amen. They claimed the blue gingham jumpers are good luck, and had informed Barbara of this just this morning. Exactly like a field trip, Barbara replies, cupping her hand around Tiff's little cheek and giving the girl an encouraging smile. What are we studying? Little Lucas Dupree asks, his blonde bangs badly in need of a trim, dangling down across his big doe eyes. He clutches at his sister's dress, as he's been doing all day. In fact, Lucas and Bethany Dupree have been clinging to each other, practically without a break, from the moment they were brought into the tunnels. Still shell-shocked from the loss of both of their parents, they are indispensable to each other, and that's fine with Barbara. She needs all the comfort and succor for these children she can get, and she'll get it wherever she can find it. We're studying how to survive an attack, Barbara says, choosing not to mince words. Now, I want everybody to follow me in a single file. Do you all remember what that means? Single file? In the back, Jenny Coogan shoots her little hand up as though sitting in the 4th grade at Marietta Park Elementary. The little girl wears thick eyeglasses, one of the lenses cracked. It means, like, walking in like a single line?
Everybody knows what single file means. Tyler Coogan snaps at his sister, making an exaggerated dramatic gesture of complete exasperation with his siblings' colossal ignorance. The 10-year-old wears Oshkosh jeans and a Braves baseball cap, and looks like the Campbell Soup Kid. He shakes a lot, which breaks Barbara's heart. It's one thing to see an adult trembling like this, whether it's illness, terror, the cold, or withdrawal, but it's quite another to see a child this age with a chronic case of the shakes. Somehow, it puts something that Barbara can't quite come to terms with in perfect perspective, whatever that perspective might imply. She's not sure, but she knows it's not good. Okay, enough with the squabbling. Barbara claps her hands and then points at her eyes. Look at me. Everybody, look at me. I'm going to climb up and make sure the coast is clear, and then I want you all to follow me quickly, quietly, in an orderly fashion, and try not to talk unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay? Everybody clear on that? We good? Most of the children give her earnest nods or shrugs, except Tyler, who has his hands on his little hips, his petulant expression suddenly puzzled. There's no coast in the middle of Georgia. What coast are you talking about? Barbara gives the boy a look. I'm lost. What are you referring to? You said, oh, right. Very astute. That's correct. There's no coast up there. She pats the boy on the shoulder. But there's walkers, so I want you to follow me quickly and quietly, okay? Sure. Whatever. The boy shrugs, trying to keep himself from shaking by thrusting his hands in his pockets. You already said that. Okay, so right now I'm going to climb up there, and I want you to all make a line and keep your eyes on me and wait for the signal. She looks around at all the little faces. The fear is so thick it seems to hang in the air like a pall. Barbara manages a smile. Here goes. She turns and maneuvers her feet into the steps embedded in the petrified hardpack of the wall. She climbs. The manhole cover is locked in place by vice clamps that Bob procured from the ruins of Woodbury paint and wallpaper. The moisture tends to rust and congeal everything in the tunnels within days, and Barbara has to struggle a bit with the clamps in order to loosen them. She grunts and finally loosens the lid, then feels the half-dozen pairs of young eyes on her as she pushes it up and partially open. The fecund odors of the forest and the acrid stench of the dead greet her, wafting on the afternoon breeze. It's almost 6 o'clock, and the daylight is faded to an indigo glow behind the trees. Okay, listen up, people, Barbara whispers over her shoulder to the kids. When I say go, everybody follow Bethany up the ladder. She glances back outside at the immediate area, a narrow clearing in the woods bordered by thickets of creeping vines and foliage, and it appears to be walker-free at the moment. About 100 yards away, through a break in the trees, Barbara can see her destination. The main building of the derelict train station. All right. Ready? Set. Go. She pushes the manhole the rest of the way open, and the iron lid flops to the dirt. She climbs out and pauses on the edge of the opening. She pulls the .45 tactical pistol with its 4-inch suppressor, originally taken off the remains of one of the governor's men, out of its holster, thumbs the safety off, and sets it to single action. Now she's shaking. She can hear the distant dead getting agitated, twigs snapping nearby. Her post-outbreak gun skills, if not the accuracy of her aim, have improved dramatically, but she wants to avoid having to shoot in front of the kids if at all possible. Bethany Lucas is the first child to emerge, peering nervously over the lip of the hole. Barbara helps the little girl wriggle the rest of the way up, and then assists her little brother, who comes out still clutching the tail of Bethany's Hello Kitty sweatshirt. Barbara motions for Bethany to stay put and whispers, "Stay right there, honey, until I get everybody else out." Bethany crouches down, her little brother beside her furiously sucking his thumb. Barbara gives her a reassuring nod and whispers, "It's okay. Just stay there until we get everybody out." She turns back to the hole. The others come out one by one. The Slocum twins emerge, wide-eyed, scanning the woods in fits and jerks. Tiff Slocum looks as though she's already hyperventilating. Barbara strokes the girl's shoulder and points to a spot on the mossy ground behind Bethany and Lucas. "Girls, just stay right over there for a second." Jenny Coogan comes out next. She has a tragic look on her face, her lips pressed together tightly, chin jutting, fists clenched, eyes glassy with fear. Barbara can tell the poor little thing is fighting a losing battle with her fears, but God bless her, she's trying. That's all Barbara can ask of anyone.
Just try to be fucking brave and get the fucking job of survival done. Okay, everybody, look at me now and remember what I told you earlier. Barbara addresses the gaggle of children in a low whisper after the last of them, Tyler Coogan, has emerged and shoved the manhole cover back across the top of the aperture, then quickly brushes dirt across the lid to camouflage it as best he can. Barbara whispers, "We're going to hurry, but not too fast, across that train track to the building on the other side." A shadow looms behind little Tyler, something slithering out of the foliage. Things start happening quickly. Barbara can't get off a shot quick enough to neutralize the sudden attack, and the biter lunges at Tyler. It's a gangly, middle-aged male in farmer's overalls with a sunken skull, milky white eyes, and flesh weathered to the consistency of parchment. It snaps its jaws at the empty space that Tyler's foot occupied a moment ago before being yanked out of harm's way. One of the girls lets out a piercing little wail, as shrill as a tea kettle whistling, and the switch goes off inside Barbara. That's it. Cover blown. Now it's a race. There are more screams as Tyler kicks at the monster. Barbara fires at the thing, the blast of her Charter Arms .44 Bulldog making a thin, muffled pop like a wet firecracker, and the tree behind the creature erupts. "Come on, Annie Oakley," she thinks frantically. Tyler scoots away as fast as his little butt and legs can carry him. The walker claws at the boy, snagging a piece of his Oshkosh jeans. Barbara fires again. The blast chews a chunk out of the thing's shoulder, barely phasing it, hardly slowing it down. But her third shot hits the bullseye, creating a trough through the crown of the thing's skull and punching through half its rotting frontal lobe. Pink, soupy fluid gushes out the back of its head as it deflates and collapses. Tyler scurries into Barbara's arms. She catches him and hugs him to her breast and lets him silently sob for a moment, but only a moment. The shift in the tide of shadows behind the trees all around them can be felt more than seen, can barely be heard under the rustle of the wind through the pine boughs. "That was a badass move on your part," Barbara soothes the little boy in her arms. "But now the thing is, we have to move even faster." He looks up at her through tears. "What are we waiting for?" In Olympic track and field, a gold medalist can traverse 100 yards in a little under 10 seconds. A high school track star can do it in maybe 11 seconds flat, perhaps a little less. But on this day, as the dusk begins to close in on the outskirts of Woodbury, and the horde, drawn to the noise of terrified squealing, surrounds the children, Barbara's gaggle charges across that weed-whiskered lot toward the train station with a purpose far more intense than that of those competing in a track meet. There is no official record-keeping for preschoolers running the 100-yard dash, but if there were, one would have a difficult time dissuading Barbara Stern that each and every one of her kids now deserves a medal. They reach the side door of the ancient wood-sided edifice at the same moment the horde crosses the adjacent tracks and starts toward the fresh young meat in their midst. Tiff and Mercy Slocum begin jumping up and down in panic, and Lucas goes deeper into himself in the folds of his sister's sweatshirt. Barbara refrains from looking over her shoulder. She's too busy fishing for a key in her dress pocket while recalling that the last time she visited this building, the governor was in charge of things around here, and they were using the station warehouse for the safekeeping of valuables and confiscated items. Barbara finds the key, thrusts it into the lock, turns the tumblers, and throws open the door. They pour into the building one at a time, some of them tripping over discarded packing straps and trash on the floor. A few of them tumble and fall. Barbara brings up the rear and slams the door shut behind her. She lets out a heavy sigh of relief as the thudding noises of walkers bumping into the door and brushing up against the boarded window start reverberating. Barbara pulls the shade down on the barred door window and leans back against the wall, another sigh issuing out of her. The kids help one another up, some of the younger ones still whimpering. Barbara asks if everybody's okay, and she gets nods all around from the little troopers. Catching her breath, Barbara drops her pack, heavy with her extra ammo, batteries, a walkie-talkie, and provisions, and then regards the dusty room. The high ceiling has long fluorescent fixtures that haven't seen power in over a year. The tall windows on the west side of the room are boarded on the outside, painted over with black Rust-Oleum on the inside, the air permeated with sour-smelling must. Boxes and crates rise to the rafters on all sides, some of the stacks forming aisles down the center of the room, where more crates and pallets brim with forgotten riches, such as oil paintings, cash drawers from store registers, home safes, wardrobes draped with furs, and all sorts of expensive knickknacks, ivory, fine china, and heirlooms. Barbara shakes her head as she takes a closer look at the center aisle. She remembers the governor scouring the abandoned homes along Barty and Narnina streets, trolling for valuables that might be of use if the apocalypse ever slouched to an end. Barbara remembered thinking it was sick, and thinking of Hitler harvesting gold teeth from the dead. She reaches down and opens a velvet-lined jewelry box. Inside the compartments lie the tarnished and gleaming worldly treasures of some long-forgotten southern dowager. Barbara picks up a tiny, diamond-encrusted brooch in the shape of a uniformed black attendant, a racist symbol reminiscent of little black lawn jockeys, pickaninny pins they used to call them, and it brings on a wave of unexpected emotion. She shakes her head some more as she throws the ridiculous lavalier back in the ridiculous jewelry box. "Listen up, everybody." She doesn't take her eyes off the jewelry box. "I want everybody to move to the other side of the room where there are no windows. Do it now, please. No talking, just move." The kids drift to the far side of the room, each of them wide-eyed, nervous, jittery. Bethany Dupree takes charge and motions for Lucas and the younger kids to hurry up. They all crowd together under a huge regulator clock that stopped at midnight many months earlier and will probably never tell the correct time again. Barbara pulls the 44, double-checks the safety, and calls out, "I want everybody to go ahead and cover your ears." The 4-inch suppressor apparatus, contrary to what the movies say, does not completely silence a pistol. It only suppresses the blast, taking it down a few decibels from its normal, harsh, sibilant boom. She fires a single shot into the jewelry box, sending shards of wood, velvet, stainless steel, and precious gemstones up into the air. The echo finally dies down, and then an avalanche of silence presses down on the warehouse. The kids freeze, gaping, terrified. Barbara sighs. She holsters her gun, then turns and walks over to the side door. She pushes the shade aside a couple of centimeters and peers outside at the grounds, the far outskirts of Woodbury, the wall off to the right, and the rooftops of the town buildings beyond the barricade. "I know you're all too smart, too grown-up and too brave to be treated like babies." She says this loud enough for the kids to hear her, but she doesn't take her eyes off the horde of walking corpses outside in the setting sun, crowding the train yard and milling about the town's welcome sign. "Am I right?" A couple of them, Bethany Dupree, the Coogans, mumble affirmatively. "Then I'll give it to you straight. There's a war coming. Not a play war, not a pretend war, a real one. It's not a game." She turns and looks at them. "We have a job to do. We need to be very, very quiet, above all other things, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" They tell her they understand. She nods. "Good." She looks back out the gap between the barred window and the shade. "Good." She thinks about it. "No talking unless it's absolutely necessary. No laughing, no fighting." She hears one of the kids approaching her, the footsteps cautious, hesitant. Bethany Dupree stands beside her. "Mrs. Stern? Call me Barb." "Okay. Barb? Can I ask you a question?" Barbara looks at the child, looks into those soft, guileless blue eyes. "Of course, honey." "Who are we fighting? The walkers?" Barbara nods. "Yeah, sort of." The girl licks her lips. "We're going to have a war with the walkers?" "Yes." The girl thinks for a moment. "But haven't we already been doing that?" Barbara ponders the question, then looks back out at the multitude of ragged figures shambling aimlessly about the outskirts in the dusky light. When she speaks again, it is in a lower register, her voice shot through with grave foreboding. "Not like this, sweetie. Not like this." Chapter 16. Fuck! Miles Littleton kicks the brake pedal and skids the Challenger across a weathered macadam in the middle of the Thomaston woods. He comes to a screeching halt on a hairpin that sits at the top of Mullins Hill. His headlights throw two beams of silver through the foggy, dense wall of birches in front of him. His heart races. His mouth is dry. He stares as he registers what he's seeing. He slams the shift lever into park, leaves the engine running, and gets out. He pads across the shoulder, down a gravel slope, and through about 15 feet of oily dark forest, batting away the gnats and vines and slender pine boughs that claw him in the face. He comes to a gap in the undergrowth and peers out through the opening. In the distance, down in a vast patchwork of fallow brown tobacco fields in the pale moonlight, he sees the shadow of the slow-moving motorcade. From this distance, illuminated by the pinpricks of light from torches and headlamps, the convoy vehicles look as tiny as figures in an ant farm, and harmless, almost festive, as they churn westward, traveling in a narrow single-file formation in the center median of Highway 74, like a radiant yellow string of fireflies. It takes a moment for the shapes behind the last of the vehicles to register in Miles's brain. At first, it just looks like the wind is blowing up gouts of black earth into the atmosphere behind the caravan, or that perhaps he's looking at a vast bank of fog rolling in, or that maybe it's just his eyes playing tricks. He curses himself for not bringing the binoculars. What the fuck was he thinking? Things are moving very fast and shit is slipping through the cracks, but there's nothing he can do about it now. He squints, swallows hard. Is that? No. Can't be. No fucking way. But the more he stares at that enormous carpet of moving shadows behind the convoy's rear end, the more he comes to terms with it. Holy fucking shit, he murmurs, and turns away from the scene. Cobbling up the slope, his heart hammering in his chest, he rushes back to his ride. He throws open the driver's door and rifles through the contents of the passenger seat, grabbing the Radio Shack walkie-talkie. He presses the send button. Yo, sister girl, you there? He lifts up the button and hears nothing, not even static. He presses it again. Yo, Norma, Lily, anybody? Y'all hear me? Nothing. Not a single crackle of static or hiss of white noise. He looks at the back of the device, opens the tray, and dumps out the single 9-volt battery. He looks at it. The terminals are corroded. It looks ancient. Goddamn motherfucking batteries! He tosses the worthless two-way radio into the back seat and he revs the engine. He grips the shift knob, slams the level down into drive, and gooses the foot feed. The transmission engages, and the car lurches, pressing him into the seat. Heading back down the hill, swerving around abandoned wrecks, Miles listens to the ticking clock in his brain and does the math. Woodbury lies 17 miles to the west. At the rate the convoy is going, they'll reach the town in 8 to 10 hours. The attack will come at first light the next morning. Bob Stuckey has the shakes. He does his best to deal with them as he power walks as fast as his arthritic legs will carry him through the narrow, leprous channel of ancient Georgia clay, his flashlight bouncing off the rusty earth and darkness that plunges ahead of him into the void. He's in a hurry, ignoring the tremors. He has a job to do. The tunnel wends its way east toward Elkins Creek, and with each passing support beam it gets shaggier and shaggier with stalactites of roots and calcium deposits hanging down like chandeliers. The passageway, once a zinc mine, feels as though it closes in on a person the farther west he goes, like it's a giant gullet swallowing all who dare to traverse its depths. Currently, Bob can't tell if this phenomenon is imaginary or real, but he currently can detect a quickening of his pulse and a feeling that his pack is getting heavier and heavier the deeper he penetrates the mine shaft. His boots squeak rhythmically on the stony floor, and his breath wheezes out of him with the syncopated huff of a lame horse. Because his hands are greasy with cold sweat, he can barely hold on to the flashlight, but that's okay. Lives depend upon his getting to the cave-in, and he won't let his relapse get in the way of his mission. They say your first reaction is the truest. They say your original thought, your initial gut feeling, is always the correct course of action. But when Bob heard the boy laying out his plan, a deceptively simple way of not only fighting back, but fighting back hard and decisively, he experienced a wave of emotion. The Dupree boy reminds Bob of some of the young Marines he patched up over in the Middle East so many years ago. Not in specific ways, but in the intangibles. The way young men will go inside themselves when threatened. the way a street fighter will get that cobra calm before striking out with feral intensity. The boy had looked almost dreamy as he'd proposed the insane stages of his strategy. The more Bob thinks about it, the more it makes sense. Choose your favorite cliché. You fight fire with fire, take the battle to the enemy. A strong defense is a strong offense. Remember the fucking Alamo. He stops for a moment, ears ringing, guts burning with nausea. He digs in his pocket and finds his medicine, the battered metal flask, a remnant of his hard drinking days after the death of Megan Lafferty, and he thumbs off the cap. He takes a quick swig, not too much, just enough to keep the trembling under control. Like methadone. It's funny. Bob used to joke with the governor that he needed his medicine to get through the day. Now the alcohol is serving as just that. Medicine. For the last 24 hours, Bob had secretly been treating his condition with measured doses of hooch. There's no pleasure in it. No high, no buzz. Just a constant leveling of his nerves, like outboard directional jets on a spacecraft. Bob knows this is the only way. Otherwise, he would either drink himself into oblivion or go through the horrible symptoms of withdrawal again, the delirium tremens, resulting in seizures and dry heaves. Either way, he would be no good to anybody right now. So he calibrates and administers these sips at regular intervals, and he focuses on the task at hand. He replaces the cap and continues on. He makes a turn and starts to see the telltale signs of a stream carving its way above him through the earth. In the beam of his flashlight, the icicles of sandstone and calcium dangle down, growing longer and longer, the roots glistening with moisture and the barnacles of molds clinging to the formations. He notices the air getting more and more fetid and musty, like the inside of a rotten gourd. He shines his light on an object looming straight ahead. In the murk of the flashlight beam, the overturned coal car looks like a fossilized baby carriage lying upside down. The landmark Bob remembers from the last time he came here, ironically to rescue that bug-fuck crazy preacher and his flock of followers. Bob knows the creek is above him, and he picks up his pace. As he trundles along, he pulls the walkie-talkie from his belt. Thumbing the send button, he says,
"Hey, Lily girl, you got your ears on?"
Nothing but static. He thumbs the button.
"Can you hear me? Lily, it's Bob. Over."
Through the sizzle of bad reception, he hears a ghostly wisp of a voice.
"Go ahead, Bob. I'm coming up on the cave-in."
"Good, Bob. Set it up as quickly as possible."
"Copy that."
He puts the walkie back on his belt and stops suddenly. His heart pounds. He hears a noise. He clicks off the flashlight. The tunnel plunges into darkness. Radiant fireflies swim in his field of vision. A faint blur of purple methane glowing as his eyes adjust. He pulls his .357 Magnum and carefully flicks the safety off, then presses the flashlight against the barrel and clicks it back on. The beam reveals a slight curve in the tunnel 50 feet ahead of him. He remembers the turn from the last time he visited this area and the cave-in that lies just beyond it. He can hear the watery vocalizations of a biter, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the darkness just around the bend.